Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a time when your nose is filled with the smell of damp straw, your clothes are woolen and scratchy, and someone down the lane is definitely burning something suspicious in a clay bowl. We're going to explore what getting high was like in medieval times. Not that anyone called it that, of course. You're not exactly wandering into a neon-lit dispensary, more like a thatched roof hut where the air's thick with mystery and someone's muttering in Latin over a steaming pot of herbs. Now you probably won't survive this. Not because of the drugs, but because medieval sanitation is, let's say, subpar. And no, that honey cake isn't enhanced. It's just got 3 bees still inside. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're cozy already, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Drop it in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in a smoky cottage. The rafters are low, the air hangs thick with the scent of rosemary and something just a bit sharper. There's a little clay pot in the corner with curling tendrils of grey-blue smoke drifting from it, and your host, a sturdy woman with a crooked smile and far too many necklaces, is feeding dried herbs onto it like she's summoning something. This is how your day starts. Back then, people didn't separate spiritual life and physical remedies like we do. Smoke wasn't just about warmth, it was medicine, purification, sometimes entertainment, and occasionally it got weird. There are stories, half documented, half whispered, about how villagers would burn henbane or thorn apple, sit in the haze, and see visions. You might call that hallucinating. They called it listening to the spirits. In one tucked-away village, a healer might grind up a mixture of wormwood, belladonna, and poppy, each one dancing along the edge of usefulness and danger, and use the blend to treat insomnia or melancholy. Side effects? Oh, just mild death. But before that, vivid dreams, strange laughter, and a sudden urge to pet the cat for 3 hours. You step outside and someone's sweeping their doorstep with a bundle of sage so aggressively, it's like they're trying to erase sin itself. Incense isn't just for churches, it's for homes too, especially during plagues or hard winters. Some thought the smoke of certain herbs could protect the lungs or keep evil spirits from crawling down your chimney. And yes, some of it did have psychoactive properties. Mild ones mostly, enough to make you feel floaty, drowsy, or in some cases, deeply convinced that your neighbor's cow was reciting the Psalms. One monk in Bohemia reportedly inhaled smoke from a resin burned during long night vigils, and claimed to see the Virgin Mary floating above the altar, holding a chicken. Historians still argue whether that was a spiritual vision, or just poor ventilation and too much pine sap. Then there's the fumitory, no, not a medieval vape shop, though the name fits. This was a plant thought to clear the mind, especially when dried and burned. Some people swore it brought clarity. Others said it caused headaches and made you sing to the walls. Like many medieval things, results varied. You pass a traveling tinker selling dried herbs and wax cones. He calls them soul centers, meant to calm restless hearts. He says a good burn of valerian and rose petals helps with dreams. He doesn't mention that too much valerian can make you think you're floating above your own head, watching your body try to churn butter. Nearby, a small chapel is holding a healing mass. The incense is thick and sweet, frankincense, maybe myrrh, and people sway slightly as they sing. Is it holy fervor or mild lightheadedness? Bit of both, really. One fringe theory, mostly entertained by the more romantic historians, suggests that some monasteries used fragrant smokes during long vigils, not just to sanctify the space, but to keep the brothers relaxed. After all, if you are going to chant the same 7 psalms for 6 hours, a little herbal haze might help you hit those low notes. And while few people would say they were getting high on purpose, there is no denying the layered experience. Herbs in the fire, prayers in the air, shadows flickering on the wall, and the strange sensation that maybe, just maybe, you're not entirely alone in the room. So you sit. You breathe in the lavender, the burnt laurel, the barely audible hum of beeswax melting on the coals. Someone is humming a hymn. Your eyelids get heavy. You feel something ancient and sleepy wrap around your thoughts. And when you wake up 2 hours later, there is a goat staring at you, and you're very sure she winked. You blink slowly, trying to remember where or when you are. Outside, the rain has turned the village path into a slushy, reluctant river. Inside, the cottage smells like boiled beets and whatever was in that clay bowl earlier. Your host offers you something in a wooden cup. It's warm, it's thick, and it tastes faintly like someone tried to mix ale with toothpaste. Welcome to the curious world of medieval drinks and draughts. You're not exactly sipping cocktails in a candlelit tavern. You're imbibing history, one strange, bubbling, possibly mildly enchanted gob at a time. See, alcohol was everywhere, not because medieval folks were all party animals, but because the water was, let's say, unreliable. So people drank small ale, low alcohol beer that was safer than the village well and often brewed at home. Every household had a brew going, especially the women, known as alewives. Some were so popular they had their own signs hanging outside, shaped like a broom, a shoe, or, if they were really ambitious, a mermaid holding a mug. But here's where it gets interesting. Some of those home brews weren't just grain and hops. In went wild herbs like yarrow, heather, and bog myrtle, many with mild sedative or euphoric properties. One batch might make you sleepy, another might make you start reciting poetry to your spoon. It was like medieval microdosing, except no one was entirely sure what would happen. You duck into a tavern. It's warm, crowded, and has the unmistakable musk of wet cloaks and pickled herring. Someone in the corner is pouring something from a jug labeled Joy Root. Another man sways dramatically on his bench while trying to explain the stars to his shoes. Monkish elixirs, he says, patting your shoulder. They made me wiser. You're not sure if he means monks brewed them or that drinking them makes you feel like a monk. Either way, it's a fun night. Monasteries were surprisingly good at concocting herbal beverages. Monks had access to texts, some medical, some magical, and were fond of mixing things that could warm the belly and quiet the soul. They steeped spices, herbs, dried berries, and sometimes things you wouldn't expect, like saffron or honey-soaked fennel, into cordials. Drink one after prayer and you might feel holy. Drink two and you might start telling confessions that didn't happen. There's a particularly suspicious brew called Hippocras, a spiced wine so potent it was said to stimulate the humors, which translated probably meant gets you dancing with a broom. And then there was mead, fermented honey wine, which sounds cozy until you realize that a few mugs of it could convince you that you'd invented Latin.
Some regions took it even further. In parts of Eastern Europe, a traditional drink made from fermented mare's milk, called kumis, had an odd, fizzy kick. Historians still argue whether the effects were alcoholic or due to other natural bacterial gifts. Either way, some travelers saw it gave them vivid dreams, clearer skin, and a strong urge to sing about goats. You find yourself in a small stone kitchen, watching an old herbalist stir a steaming pot. She calls it a night draught, made with warm milk, nutmeg, and a hint of poppy. It's meant to help with sleep or keep spirits away, possibly both. She pours it into a chipped pewter cup and hands it to you, like she's offering the moon. As you sip, the edges of the world soften. The fire crackles gently, and someone outside is singing an old lullaby in a language you don't understand. The melody loops like a charm. And then there were love potions, some real, some wishful thinking. Most were made with wine, infused with herbs like basil, sage,
Or sometimes devil's mint, which was less romantic and more, well, mildly intoxicating. Whether these worked is debatable, but if someone brings you a wooden bowl of warm wine and says it's for stirring affection, maybe don't ask what's floating in it.
One fringe recipe includes powdered oyster shells and hawthorn bark, served during full moons. Another insists on adding a lock of the beloved's hair, carefully boiled, of course. You sip yours slowly, watching the room gently tilt to the left. There's a debate among scholars about just how intentional these effects were. Did people really mean to alter their state of mind, or were they simply chasing comfort in hard times? The answer's probably both. When your life includes plagues, taxes, and the constant chance of stepping in horse manure barefoot, a warm, funny-tasting cup of mystery might just be your best moment of the week. You remember a story told by a traveling bard about a woman who brewed a spiced cider so powerful it made an entire wedding party start speaking in rhymed couplets. He claimed the bride's father still only speaks in riddles. Another tale warns of a noble who drank too much of his own apricot cordial and swore his horse was a prophet. You don't know if these stories are true, but you're starting to feel like your fingers are unusually interesting. Also, you're quite sure someone just walked by wearing a hat made entirely of moss. As the night deepens, the drinks change. Out come the bitter tonics, stronger, darker, brewed with roots and bark. Not really for pleasure, more for cleansing the body. Or the mind. You sip one and taste earth, shadow, and possibly regret. Your head feels heavier, and your thoughts drift sideways. You lie back on a straw mattress. The roof above you creaks softly. Someone plays a lute off-key. The air is rich with the scent of herbs, smoke, and lightly singed wool. You're not sure what time it is, but it doesn't matter. The drink was strong, the stories were stronger, and the dreams waiting on the other side of sleep are already knocking at your door. The morning comes far too early. You're groggy, a bit tangled in a scratchy wool blanket, and very unsure whether you actually heard a duck giving marital advice during the night, or if that was just the poppy tea talking. Outside, the village stirs. Hooves on cobbles, bread ovens groaning to life, and somewhere nearby, a child loudly insisting that he is, in fact, a wizard now. You rub your temples, breathe in deeply, and instantly regret it. Someone's brewing something acrid and possibly medicinal. Welcome to the other side of the medieval getting high experience. The pungent, smoky, sniffable, and frequently sneeze-inducing world of herbs and resins. Before pipes and rolling papers, medieval folks had all kinds of ways to inhale their way to clarity, prayer, or mild hallucinations. The most familiar was incense, burned in churches, homes, and even hospitals. Frankincense and myrrh weren't just gifts for infant saviors. They were everywhere. You sit on a low wooden bench in a stone chapel as curls of smoke rise, golden and slow, catching in the morning light. It smells ancient. It smells holy. It also faintly smells like someone over-roasted their spice drawer. The church believed incense purified the air and the soul, but folks noticed something else. It had effects. You'd feel lighter, a bit floaty, a bit dreamy, especially if the church was packed, the windows closed, and the monk swinging that censer had really strong wrists. Historians still argue whether those trance-like states were fully spiritual or chemically induced. The answer, of course, is probably both. Religion and altered states have long danced together, hand in hand, or wing in wing if you believe the angels some monks swore they saw after particularly fragrant services. Back in your cottage, you meet someone stirring a bowl of dried herbs. He says it's for clearing the head. You watch him toss handfuls into the hearth, and suddenly the room is a cloud of lavender, mugwort, and what smells suspiciously like old boots. You cough. He smiles. Mugwort, by the way, was a favorite in medieval herb lore. Believed to enhance dreams, ward off evil spirits, and occasionally treat digestive woes, it was also burned in small bundles, like ancient aromatherapy. Lie down with mugwort under your pillow, they said, and you might dream of the future, or, at the very least, sleep through your neighbor's lute practice. You take a walk through a market. Someone is selling sage wrapped with wild thyme and purple rue. Another has tiny cloth bags labeled with symbols and prices that change depending on the moon. A third vendor is enthusiastically sniffing a bundle of St. John's leaf and nodding like he just solved calculus.
One stall displays a blocky chunk of blackish resin,
Or poponax,
or sweet myrrh. Not as famous as frankincense, but just as prized. Burn it, and your headaches drift away, assuming you don't mind your nose being overwhelmed by what can only be described as medieval cinnamon dungeon. You ask a woman in russet robes about another scent. She tells you it's called galbanum, used to summon visions, she says. Or at least to make goats seem wiser. You don't ask for clarification. Herbs weren't always burned. Sometimes they were crushed and inhaled, either as powders or stuffed into little wax cones. There's a travel account that mentions pilgrims along the Camino de Santiago sniffing violet poppy pastes during long treks, allegedly to keep spirits up, probably also to ignore their blisters. Some medieval remedies took a more theatrical route. In wealthier homes, people would fill pomanders, those fancy metal balls on chains, with spiced resins, dried petals and musk, ostensibly for avoiding plague. Secretly, for giving your head a mildly euphoric cloud of scent as you walked around, pretending not to be bored. You watch a noblewoman wave one gently beneath her nose, smile dreamily, and immediately spill soup into her lap. So yes, mildly euphoric. You find a healer's hut at the edge of town. She's boiling valerian root and adding chamomile and just a hint of henbane.
For rest.
She says. You eye the henbane. That particular plant was known to cause vivid hallucinations, tremors and, depending on the dose, conversations with imaginary saints. Henbane, belladonna, datura, these were the troublemakers of the medieval herb world, used by cunning folk, midwives and, yes, the occasional would-be sorcerer. They were often ingredients in flying ointments, rubbed on the skin, particularly on sensitive areas. No, not going into detail. These concoctions were meant to induce visions of flight, transformation, or journeys to magical places. Historians still argue whether the people who used them actually believed they flew, or simply had experiences so intense they described them in the only language they had. Tales of soaring, dancing, or meeting horned strangers at crossroads. Either way, you're suddenly aware of how the wind moves differently out here, as if even the grass remembers. The healer offers you a cloth with crushed betony and mint, tied neatly with red thread.
Hold it to your nose when the day's too heavy,
She says. You do, and for a moment, the headache in your temples eases. The trees seem softer. The world blurs gently at the corners, like it's been painted with old watercolors. And this wasn't just superstition. Some compounds in these herbs actually do have calming or psychoactive effects. The issue was dosage. Medieval medicine often operated on the principle of some is good, more is divine. So a calming effect could turn into a 3-day nap, or worse. But you're careful. You sniff, not sip. You inhale, not ingest. And as you sit on a mossy stone wall watching the sunset melt into ochre and plum, you realize, for all their weirdness and trial by error methods, medieval folks had their own ways of finding peace. A puff of sweet smoke, a pinch of powder, a dream carried on steam and cedar. The bell in the village tolls. Someone nearby sneezes into a cauldron, you're not sure why. A cat gives you a suspicious look. You decide not to ask. Everything is calm, just a little crooked, just a little soft around the edges.
You blink awake sometime after sunset, unsure if you actually fell asleep or just drifted off, staring into a mug of nettle tea that smelled faintly of regret. The sky outside has turned that dark, inky blue that makes torches glow like fireflies. And someone nearby is enthusiastically trying and failing to sing a ballad about St. Hubert and the enchanted deer. The night is when things get weirder. Always has been. Especially if you're a medieval peasant with limited lighting, a long list of chores, and a brain that's still half full of whatever root tincture the local midwife gave you for your bad knee. Tonight, though, you're going somewhere special. There's talk in the village of a celebration. Not quite a feast, not quite a ritual, something in between. The old folk call it a gathering, and it always seems to happen on the dark moon, or when a particular owl starts singing backwards. You never quite get a straight answer. You wrap yourself in a borrowed cloak, teal, slightly damp, smells like cheese, and follow the flickering lights out beyond the edge of the fields, through the hedges, past the tree that looks suspiciously like it's judging you, until you find them. A loose ring of people seated around a low fire, herbs smoldering on the coals, and a thick, sweet smell hanging in the air like warm syrup. Someone hands you a cup. It's hot, bitter, tastes of anise and old pine cones. You sip, you cough. Someone laughs softly and offers a second sip. You take it. This is what scholars sometimes call folk pharmacology. It's not written down. It's passed through memory, gossip, and that one auntie who claims she once cured a headache by licking a snail. Historians still argue whether these nighttime concoctions were spiritual, recreational, or medicinal. Most likely they were all three. The line between medicine and magic was smudged like soot on a chimney. One person's ritual was another's therapy. And then there's music. It starts low, just a drumming of wooden spoons on knees, a hum that grows into harmony. You lean back, feel the warmth of the fire, and realize that the drink is doing something. The night sharpens, then softens. Shadows dance in a new way. You're not hallucinating exactly, but everything feels like it's leaning in, listening, waiting. In parts of medieval Europe, this kind of gathering had different names. In France, they whispered of the Sabbat. In Germany, the Hexenacht. In the British Isles, it might just be called a good evening with strong tea. But in all cases, there was an undercurrent of altered consciousness, whether through herbs, smoke, or just the collective murmur of people surrendering to the strange. You're not here to summon demons or cast spells. You're here to feel something shift, and it does. A story begins, someone weaving a tale about a knight who drank wild rose water and spent a week speaking only in riddles. Another talks about the old baker who ate spoiled rye bread and believed his goats could read. Spoiled rye, that's a big one. Ergot, a fungus that grows on grains, was a frequent, unintentional trip in medieval life. People who consumed ergot-contaminated bread often experienced seizures, hallucinations, or a sensation of their limbs burning or twisting. They called it St. Anthony's fire. You call it an unplanned psychedelic moment brought to you by bad baking. You eye the bread at this gathering a little more carefully now. But not all tales were so dramatic. One older woman speaks of a tree near the marsh that sings when the moon is high and you've eaten enough fennel. Someone else shares a vision he had after inhaling boiled pine sap. He was a fish, then a cloud, then a priest's boot. You're not sure if that's symbolic or just poorly translated. The fire crackles, the mug is refilled. This one tastes floral. You detect marigold, maybe some kind of honey infusion. It's comforting, warm, and mildly soporific. Your head gets heavy in the nicest way, like it's lined with moss. Your thoughts slow down. You're no longer trying to chase the meaning of things. You just let them pass by, like wool drifting in a stream. A storyteller with gold-threaded sleeves stands and begins to chant. The cadence is strange. You can't follow the words, but the rhythm tugs at you, like distant bells or your grandmother's lullabies. You're not sure what's real anymore, but it doesn't bother you. Then someone brings out a bundle of herbs. tied tight with string. They toss it on the fire, and the smoke turns blue. Everyone goes quiet. "This is dream smoke," someone whispers. "It helps the dead speak. Or maybe the bees. Depends on the recipe." You inhale deeply, and then everything seems to echo. The stars pulse, the wind sighs. You don't hear voices exactly, but you understand things, like why chickens always look vaguely guilty, or why the well creaks at midnight even when no one is there. It all makes perfect sense. For about 10 minutes. When the effects fade, you're a little dizzy, a little chilly, and intensely aware that your left shoe is missing. A man next to you insists that it just turned into a frog and hopped away. You nod politely and choose not to follow that line of inquiry. As the fire dies down, people begin to stretch and stand. Someone plays a bone flute. Someone else snores softly on a log. You sit still, trying to memorize the exact smell of the air. Smoke, mint, burnt thyme, and damp grass. It smells like a secret, a mild one. The kind you'd tell a sleepy cat. Eventually, you walk back to your cottage, eyes half closed, a slow smile tugging at your face. The path is uneven, but your body remembers it, or the herbs do. Hard to tell. You pass under the watchful eye of the owl tree, past the hedge, over the stile, back into the world of hearth smoke and cold floors and slightly judgmental goats. But something lingers, like you've stepped out of a pocket of timelessness. A little high, a little hazy, very human. Morning comes too soon, as it always does. You wake up with hay in your hair, a vague ache in your knees, and a memory of smoke that feels more like a dream than something you lived through. Outside, the rooster is screaming like it has a grudge against joy, and someone is arguing again about who borrowed the good ladle. You sit up slowly, groaning like a monastery door, and realize you're still wearing your left sock, but somehow not your right. The frog theory may have had merit after all. But the day waits for no medieval peasant, even one still tasting thyme and honey from last night's mug. There are tasks to do, mundane ones. You stir the fire, fetch water, swat a chicken off the stool again. Yet, beneath all that, you carry the glow of something unusual, something not quite explainable. You wouldn't call it getting high, not in the modern sense. There's no label, no dosage, just the slow alchemy of roots and ritual, smoke and story, that gives your brain a soft nudge sideways. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly sought out altered states of mind recreationally, or whether it was always folded into religion, medicine, or superstition. But you can't help but think, while you're stirring porridge with a stick that once doubled as a wand, that the boundaries were blurrier than anyone today might guess. Take the example of dream herbs. In some parts of Europe, people swore by mugwort or wild lettuce for helping them see visions or receive messages while they slept. In others, poppy seeds were steeped into night broths. And then there were things like henbane, wild, unpredictable, sometimes deadly, sometimes divine. You remember a local midwife telling you once, "The plant doesn't know what you want, you have to tell it." Then she laughed and handed you a piece of dried apple dipped in wormwood. Even monasteries weren't entirely immune to the temptations of mind-altering substances. Monks grew herbs for medicine, sure, but sometimes their journals mentioned curious dreams or a warming spirit during prayer. Some even wrote of strange colors, dancing saints, or the sensation of floating during Mass, divine vision, or overly strong mead. You walk down to the village green, passing a man carefully peeling bark from a willow tree. He claims it helps with his aching back and the voices he hears in his sleep. You nod and wish him a good morning. You've learned not to ask too many questions. Later, in the fields, you hear talk of a neighboring village that banned marjoram because it made the goats act immodestly. No one explains how.
you don't press. What's clear is this: throughout the medieval world, getting high, intentionally or otherwise, was woven into everyday life in ways that don't always fit modern definitions. Sometimes it was prayer, sometimes it was pleasure, sometimes it was a terrible misunderstanding involving spoiled honey and a misidentified mushroom.
You find a shady spot by a stone wall and sit for a bit, letting the sun warm your shoulders. A bee buzzes lazily near your ear, possibly judging your lack of productivity. You hum softly to yourself, a tune from last night's gathering, though the words have slipped away like steam. It's here, in these quiet pauses, that the memory returns. The strange weightlessness, the laughter, the colors just a little brighter than usual. You remember the old baker's story about bread that made people dance, and you wonder if there's a grain of truth in it, or maybe just a grain of rye, ergot again. It pops up in records across Europe, sometimes blamed for madness, sometimes for miracles. In one infamous case, an entire town experienced spasms, hallucinations, and fits of fervor that led to days of chaos and confession. Some said it was a curse, others blamed the miller's flour, and a few quietly admitted it had been the most exciting week of their lives. You stretch your legs and wander back home, where your spouse is tending a pot of something that smells deeply suspicious. You ask what it is. Soup, they say, vaguely. You make a mental note to check for mushrooms. As you eat, you glance over the carved beam above the hearth. Someone, maybe you, maybe someone before you, etched a strange spiral there years ago. No one knows what it means, but it's always felt important, protective maybe, or just decorative. Historians would probably argue about that too. Later that night, the air is cool again. A storm is gathering in the distance, lightning flickering on the horizon like a noble trying to read without glasses. You lie down on your straw-stuffed mattress, pulling the wool blanket up to your chin. Your feet still smell faintly of elderflower. And this is how it usually ends, not in a grand crescendo, but in a quiet moment, your body heavy with the day, your mind soft from tea, story, and song. A long exhale, a candle flickering low. Getting high in medieval times wasn't about escape. It was about shift, a gentle sidestep from reality, just long enough to see the world a little differently, whether through herbs, fumes, fermented honey, or the right chant at the right time under the right moon. People sought not to forget, but to feel more, or feel through. And you felt it. Maybe you didn't float. Maybe you didn't speak Latin backwards or hear the thoughts of bees, but you touched something, soft, flickering, ancient. The same urge that nudged monks to sip dream balm, that led peasants to whisper to plants, that danced in the smoke around the communal fire. Now, let it settle. Let the memory blur like ink in rain. Let the soft breath of sleep pull you under, back to your own straw-stuffed reality.
And now, the storm has passed. Or maybe it never came. Your shutters creak gently in their hinges, stirred by a breeze that smells faintly of wet stone and wood smoke. The hearth has gone quiet, its embers now the color of faded rubies. The dog beside your bed lets out a sigh so deep it sounds like the end of an old story. You lie still. The wool blanket rises and falls with your breath. Somewhere beyond the cottage walls, the world keeps spinning. Fields growing, mushrooms sprouting in hidden hollows, night creatures slipping through shadows like soft brush strokes on parchment. There's no rush now. No list to check. No task waiting with hands on its hips. Only the hush of centuries folding in on themselves like tired wings. You are small and warm, held gently by time. The sky outside is heavy with stars that shimmer like candlelit gilt on vellum. Whatever stirred in you during that strange, drifting night, the warmth in your chest, the way colors seemed to hum, wasn't just from herbs or mead or chanting monks. It came from within too. From that quiet corner of your mind that still wonders, still dreams, still believes that maybe, just maybe, a well-timed flower, a sip of honeyed ale, or a whisper under the moon can change the shape of your evening. So, breathe. Deeper now. Slower. Let the straw beneath you feel like clouds. Let the soft weight of sleep press gently over your chest like a hand that means no harm. You made it through the weird, wonderful world of medieval highs, barefoot, underfed, occasionally sticky, but still whole, still curious. Close your eyes now. Let it all fade. You're safe. You're warm. You're home. The last word has been spoken, but my breath is not yet done, for another tale lies curled within it. We sail gently into a city of salt-stained sails, sunlit sandstone, and the faint but unmistakable scent of something roasted, something bitter, a little sweet, and vaguely unsettling. You're on the deck of a slow, creaky merchant ship, and as Carthage's reddish rooftops stretch before you, the wind carries hints of palm oil, animal musk, and charred date pits. It's the kind of smell that makes you think someone definitely tried to drink that and probably regretted it. Which, lucky for you, is exactly what happened. You probably won't survive this timeline, by the way. Not without some intestinal drama, sandal chafing, or an argument about ship taxes. But you'll make it far enough to sample something brewed, black, and ancient, possibly with twigs in it. You step off the ship and into the sun-drenched docks of ancient Carthage, where bronze bracelets jingle and traders shout over baskets of figs and ceramic jugs. You dodge a goat. You nearly trip over a boy hauling something sticky in a cloth sack, date pulp probably. The streets are alive, uneven, loud, and surprisingly caffeinated. It's morning, technically. The heat already clings to your shoulders, and you're drawn by a smell that is definitely not fish, not incense, and not wine. It's a scent with an edge, a little bitter, a little burnt, a sort of desert espresso if you squint. You follow it through an alley. The city around you is a blend of polished columns and cracked stone, bright fabric tarps fluttering above market stalls, and a general sense that everyone is both bargaining and eavesdropping. Carthage isn't a sleepy village. It's a juggernaut of trade, positioned on the North African coast like a lion sprawled across a sunlit rock. Goods come here from everywhere, Spain, Greece, Egypt, beyond, and get repackaged, renamed, and resold by the barrel. And among the piles of purple dye and papyrus scrolls, you find something less impressive looking. A man, tending to a set of low clay jars over a pile of smoking coals. He stirs slowly. His expression says, "I have burned my fingers too many times." But his customers seem patient. One woman taps her foot. A teenager shifts from one sandal to the other. They're waiting for a drink. Not wine, not beer, not water, but something else. You edge closer. Inside one jar, a slurry bubbles softly. It's dark, almost black, and smells of roasted dates, scorched wood, and stubborn tradition. The man ladles a portion into a tiny clay cup, hands it to the teenager, and mutters something about it being stronger than goat's breath. Charming. Here's the mainstream historical fact of the moment. The Carthaginians were master traders. They were Phoenician descendants, sea-savvy, culturally complex, and economically ruthless. They built an empire of ships and silver, but they also had a habit of turning everyday plants into strange experiments. Enter the date pit. Dates were abundant in Carthage, sweet, nutritious, easy to store. The fruit was eaten or pressed into syrup. But the pits, well, someone, almost certainly someone bored, roasted them, crushed them, boiled them, and drank the result. Why? That's where things get blurry. Theories vary. Some say it started as a way to stretch resources, waste nothing. Others claim it had ceremonial roots. And some fringe thinkers argue it began as a prank on Roman visitors. Historians still argue whether it was medicinal, recreational, or a particularly dusty joke that stuck around. As you sip your first sample, awkwardly, because the cup's rim is chipped, you taste earth, charcoal, a ghost of sweetness underneath. It's not bad exactly, but it's not comforting either. It doesn't make you sigh with pleasure. It makes you blink, It makes you awake. The vendor watches you, unimpressed. Good for morning, he mutters, bad for teeth. You nod solemnly. You have no idea. A rooster screams somewhere behind you. The market pulses louder. You notice another stand selling a different version of the same drink, thicker, with herbs added. A small child chugs a cup and immediately bursts into a fit of giggles. Is that normal? Probably not. But again, the line between beverage and bold experiment here is thin. You meander past sellers of roasted locusts, fish paste, and small, fragrant bricks of incense. Another vendor offers you a sample brewed by moonlight, which is either romantic or suspicious. You take a sip. It tastes like tree bark and ambition. Somewhere nearby, two men argue about the right way to roast the pits, light until golden or dark until they smoke. They both cite mythical grandmothers and the old ways. Their voices rise. A third man interrupts, insisting that adding crushed olive leaf unlocks the stomach. No one seems convinced. You watch a woman carefully strain her brew through a bit of cloth, flicking out a tiny beetle with calm efficiency. Her hands move like she's done this for decades. Maybe she has. By now, the drink has wrapped its fingers around your nerves. You feel a tiny buzz. Not quite the jolt of coffee, but a warm, steady hum. Your limbs don't tremble. Your thoughts don't race. But you are aware. The sun feels brighter. The street feels louder. The ground feels more like something you could sweep or conquer, depending on mood. Someone shouts about a new shipment of Iberian salt. A donkey groans dramatically. You sip again. The truth is, no one can say with certainty whether this roasted pit drink was as widespread as it feels right now. Archaeological records mention date processing and strange decoctions, but the specifics are fuzzy. What's clear, though, is that Carthage wasn't afraid to play with its food, and sometimes, out of boredom, brilliance, or desperation, people just decide that boiling seeds might be the answer to something. Anything. So here you are, in the heart of a trading superpower, sipping ancient not coffee, brewed from something most people would toss in the compost. The morning slips forward. You tuck the cup under your arm and drift down a side street, the flavor still lingering. Somewhere a temple bell tolls. A camel sneezes. The drink? Still bitter. You follow the smell again, richer now like burnt almonds and clay, to a quieter corner of the city, where the clamor of the market fades into the rhythmic thud of a wooden mallet. A man sits cross-legged on a woven mat, pounding something inside a carved stone bowl. The pits, of course, but here they're not just roasted. They're being ground down, sifted, sorted like gold flakes. You crouch nearby. He ignores you completely. This is pit-to-pitcher territory now. The humble date pit, oval, ridged, and easily mistaken for something a bird might ignore, has an unlikely afterlife in Carthage. Once you've eaten the soft, sticky flesh of the fruit, that pit can become dozens of things: livestock feed, fuel for fire, even a game piece for children bored of goat watching. But the most eccentric use by far? Brewing it. You watch the process unfold. First, the dates are picked when they're just right, not too soft, not too dry. The fruit is split and eaten or mashed into syrup for cakes, breads, or fermented drinks. The pits are collected, by hand, usually by children or very stubborn grandmothers, and left in the sun to dry. This takes a few days, depending on the mood of the wind. Then comes the roasting. The man gestures toward a set of flat clay trays, each dusted with what looks like scorched wood chips. These are the roasted pits, deep brown, sometimes cracked. He picks one up, bites it lightly and nods. You are not encouraged to do the same. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Carthaginians were deeply invested in preserving and storing food in ways that could withstand long journeys, across deserts, across oceans, across seasons. Roasting pits would have been both a preservation method and a means to create something that felt energizing, even if the actual stimulant content was questionable. Yes, sorry, there's no confirmed caffeine in date pits, but your imagination is doing heavy lifting. You're handed a turn at the stone mortar. You try grinding the roasted pits. It's a slow process. They're harder than they look. The texture is a mix between sand and something that once hoped to be a rock. Eventually, the fragments become coarse powder, bitter-smelling and faintly oily. You cough once. The man grins. You're doing fine. Once ground, the powder is boiled, usually in large clay vessels blackened from years of direct flame. Sometimes herbs are added, mint, sage, wormwood if you're feeling rebellious. The goal is unclear. More flavor? More function? Less sadness? Historians still argue whether these herbal additions were meant to aid digestion, enhance taste, or just mask the fact that it was essentially boiling crushed wood. The resulting brew is poured through linen or a fine woven basket. What drips out is dark, smoky, and slightly gritty. Not pleasant, but strangely grounding. You're offered a fresh cup. This one has a few floating seeds. You try not to look directly at them. Across the courtyard, two women stir their own batch over a small fire. They debate, gently, firmly, about roasting time. One insists a lighter roast is better for the nerves. The other scoffs. "You want nerves?" she says, poking the fire. "Try being married to a fisherman." Their laughter cracks the air. You sip again. It's definitely stronger this time. Your eyebrows twitch. Further along, a young girl is helping her grandmother pack small cloth bags with roasted pit powder. They'll be sold later, either as drink starter kits or for whatever else people imagine the stuff is good for. Toothache remedy, trade offering, smelling salt. A few bags are dyed bright blue. No one explains why. You don't ask. Back in the alley, another man sells cold pit infusion. It's not actually cold, just lukewarm, but it's been left to steep overnight, creating a thicker, more bitter liquid. He offers it to you with a slice of dried fig. It balances the bitterness, he says. It doesn't, but you appreciate the lie. And here comes your quirky tidbit. Some brewers believe that stirring the pot clockwise infused the drink with strength, while counterclockwise stirred in dreams. One older woman winks and says, "If you do both, you get bad poetry and sore ankles." That tracks. At a communal fire pit, you spot a man adding something unusual to the brew, ground shellfish powder. You raise an eyebrow, he shrugs. "For the joints," he mutters. You politely decline a taste. A moment later, someone else suggests adding a finger's length of goat milk. Another claims pine ash brings clarity. You're not sure if this is medicine or a dare. The thing is, this drink, whatever you want to call it, wasn't standardized. There was no one recipe, no formal name. In Carthaginian records, few as they are, it's referenced obliquely, a dark decoction, the bitter fire, or simply morning seed water. Catchy. You find yourself sitting beside a row of large clay pitchers, each labeled in red ink with symbols you don't understand. A man with no sandals and too many rings explains that each represents a different blend. Some are meant for alertness, others for ceremony. One, he warns, makes you see your ancestors, and they're usually unimpressed. He offers you a small cup of the mildest version. It tastes like roasted bread crust left in the sun too long. Better than expected. Worse than desired. As the sun shifts, you realize you've been drinking variations of this pit potion for hours. Your hands feel light. Your thoughts, oddly precise. You begin to notice the rhythms of the street, the way sandals scuff against stone, the soft wheeze of old men laughing, the gurgle of water ladled from clay jars. It's either the drink or your brain quietly melting. No one seems to mind. A woman plays a reed flute. A cat knocks over a pitcher. No one flinches. The day continues. You learn that certain households roast their pits with honey before grinding. Others smoke them over palm fronds. A few even ferment the pit water briefly to create a sour, fizzy variation called sleep wine, despite having no alcohol and causing no sleep. Historians still argue whether that version was a joke, a misunderstanding, or just a branding failure. You wander through a small garden where an older man carefully tends date palms. He offers you one fresh fruit and two dried pits. One for now, one for later, he says cryptically. By evening, your stomach makes a noise that could be a protest or a hymn. You sit down by a cooking fire, where a group of women pass around a shared jug of strong, pitch-black brew. They talk about goats, husbands, and a neighbor who tried roasting barley instead. Too soft, someone mutters. Came out like pudding. Your cup is refilled. The fire crackles. The stars begin to emerge. Your fingers warm around the clay. The bitter taste remains loyal and strange.
The fire has burned down to glowing embers, and your clay cup is warm in your hands again, full of something so dark it seems to absorb the moonlight. Around you, the women keep sipping and murmuring, as if this bitter little ritual were a kind of soft confession. You're not entirely sure whether you're sleepy or sharper than ever, probably both. Either way, the drink is beginning to feel less like a novelty and more like a code, a shared language. One of the women, the one with a gold tooth and a laugh like crunching gravel, leans toward you and says, "This brew knows things." You nod slowly, pretending to understand. She chuckles. "It's not just for mornings, you know. Some say it wards off bad dreams." She takes another sip. Some say it causes them. And that's the Carthaginian way. The drink isn't just something to swallow. It's a thing to believe in. Or question. Or argue about until someone starts singing off-key. You follow the conversation across a sleepy courtyard where a small shrine flickers with oil lamps. Here things feel quieter, more careful. A priest in a pale robe sits beneath an acacia tree, sipping from a shallow bowl carved with symbols. The drink, again, but different this time, infused with herbs, steeped overnight, perhaps even blessed. You sit nearby. Here's the mainstream historical fact floating into your lap like incense smoke. Carthage had a rich spiritual life. Polytheistic, ritual-driven, heavily influenced by Phoenician and North African traditions. There were rites, offerings, symbolic meals, moments when food or drink served as a bridge between worlds. And though roasted date pit brew doesn't appear on any carved altar stone, oral accounts hint at its use in sacred settings. Some believe it was offered to spirits. Others think priests drank it before ceremonies to stay alert during long chants or before midnight rituals. You can imagine that. A low hum of voices, the flickering of flamelight on stone, the slow passing of bowls among shadowy figures. The priest beside you raises an eyebrow. "You dream when you drink this?" he asks. "Sometimes," you answer, because that seems safer than "only about ducks." He nods gravely. Then it's working. And here comes your quirky tidbit. A fringe group of spiritual herbalists, probably semi-respected, probably slightly feared, claimed that the pits retained the memory of the fruit they came from, which sounds poetic until you realize they meant it literally. These folks believed each pit carried a kind of lingering sweetness of the date, and drinking it allowed you to recall the fruit's sun. You sip again. It still tastes like a roof tile. The priest leans back and mutters, "Best before dusk." After that, it opens the wrong doors. You wait for him to laugh. He doesn't. A group of older philosophers enters the shrine garden, their robes dusty, their sandals loud. They carry scrolls and opinions. One of them is loudly claiming that boiling the pits destroys their earth energies. Another insists the real benefit comes from chewing them raw, which has so far only cracked 3 teeth in his household. You get pulled into the circle. You're offered another version of the brew, lighter this time, with added anise.
The taste is surprisingly pleasant. Someone offers you a reed pen. Write what you feel, they say. You write. It still tastes like sadness and bark. They applaud. The conversation turns. Some claim the drink aids memory. Others say it ruins concentration. Depends on the phase of the moon, one whispers. And whether your neighbor's goat has been behaving. That last bit might be a metaphor or a threat. Historians still argue whether the Carthaginian pit drink had any consistent psychoactive effects. There's no surviving recipe, no universally agreed upon blend. But some accounts from nearby cultures describe similar rituals: roasted seeds, steeped herbs, ceremonial beverages that weren't quite food, weren't quite medicine, more placeholders, liminal liquids. You sip from another bowl past your way. It's gritty, someone apologizes. Didn't strain it enough, they say. Or maybe you just need to chew. Delightful. And then, because all ancient cities seem to have one, a local eccentric arrives. He's barefoot, dressed in layers of linen dyed with onion skins and something that may once have been indigo. He speaks to no one at first. Then he sits beside you and says, "The drink came from the stars, you know." You raise an eyebrow. He continues, absolutely serious. "Long ago, a date tree fell from the heavens, struck the ground like a spear, grew roots in the earth and fruit in the soul. The pit is what's left when truth burns away." He hands you a small wrapped parcel. Inside, 5 carefully polished date pits. One has been carved into a tiny face. The philosophers groan. The priest mutters something about wandering poets, but no one asks him to leave. The night deepens. Lamps burn low. You catch fragments of old stories about generals who drank the brew before battle, and oracles who used it to enter trance states. Someone says it makes you forget names, but remember dreams. Another claims they once heard it whisper. They were alone at the time.
You think about the drink again, what it is. It's not coffee, not tea, not wine. It's bitter, grounding, strange. Something between sustenance and ceremony, not delicious but dependable. Like an uncle who talks too much but always shows up with figs. The priest refills your bowl, murmurs a short prayer to a god you don't recognize, and tells you, "This is how we listen when there's nothing left to say." You drink. It's cooler now, softer. Still tastes like bark, but the edges are less sharp. Across the garden, someone plays a soft rhythm on a clay drum. A second joins in on bone flute. It's not quite music, more like a lullaby from the bottom of a well. You close your eyes briefly, just a blink. When you open them, the stars are brighter, the fire's burned low. The priest is gone. Only your bowl remains, warm in your hands. The drink is doing something. Not loud, not flashy, but real. Like it's pressing your thoughts into slow motion. You don't feel tired exactly, but you do feel still. Somewhere in the courtyard, the eccentric begins singing to a lizard. It feels like a good time to move on. You set the bowl down gently, murmur a thank you to the air, and step quietly into the shadows, still slightly bitter, slightly buzzed, and carrying more questions than answers.
You slip through the city's quietest streets, where the sandstone walls soak up moonlight and everything smells faintly of clay, ash, and overripe fruit. There's less noise now, just the occasional bleat of a stubborn goat or the clack of a wooden door shutting for the night. Carthage is winding down, but the harbor never sleeps, and neither do the ships. You drift toward the port again, where ropes creak and waves lap against hulls, and some truly questionable smells waft from the water's edge. This is where the brew took its first steps beyond Carthage, stuffed into jars, wrapped in cloth, tucked between amphorae of wine and bundles of salted fish. Sailors, as it turns out, need more than sea shanties and sandals to stay away. And date pit brew was easy to carry, hard to spoil, and strange enough to seem useful. You find a ship being loaded in the dim light of an oil lamp. 2 sailors pass you by with sacks slung over their shoulders. One grumbles about rats. The other complains that someone used the last of the wake water without asking. You pause. Wake water? He points to a jug,
black residue around the rim. You know that smell now. Roasted, gritty, almost spicy. The same drink, but thinner, harsher. Watered down for the journey, maybe. Or just badly made. Either way, it's traveling. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Carthaginians were master mariners. They mapped coastlines, built efficient ships, and established colonies from North Africa to Iberia and beyond. They carried goods, ideas, language, and apparently drinks made from leftover date debris. And because sailors are, by nature, both practical and deeply superstitious, the drink took on lives of its own as it moved. Some crews boiled it with seawater, others added bits of dried citrus peel or fennel. One particularly bold captain reportedly stirred in crushed coral. That experiment did not last long. The recipe changed as it crossed oceans. In Sicily, it was spiced. In Sardinia, it was sweetened. In Crete, they tried fermenting it with grape skins and claimed it summoned dreams of dolphins. Historians still argue whether these Mediterranean variations were directly inherited from Carthaginian trade or just parallel bursts of, let's see what happens when we boil this. But back in the harbor, the vibe is clear. This stuff matters. A young sailor sits cross-legged on a coil of rope, sipping from a tin cup, eyes half shut. He's muttering to himself, not unhappily. You catch fragments. No waves tonight. Knots too tight. Pit's too light. A rhyme? A complaint? Possibly both. You're handed a sample from one of the jugs, a travel blend, strong, bitter, a little salty, possibly by accident. You cough softly. The sailor smiles and says, "It's better in Rome," which is your cue. Because eventually, this strange black drink drifted into Roman hands, or rather, Roman noses. A merchant from the peninsula once watched a Carthaginian vendor brew the stuff, then tried to describe it back home. Like burnt olives, but not unpleasant, he said. High praise. The Romans didn't quite get it. Some thought it was medicinal, others feared it was witchcraft. One satirical poet compared it to drinking the ashes of ambition. Another claimed it stirs the blood, but confuses the heart. One senator allegedly tried it, then banned it from his villa after 3 hours of hiccups and a very vivid dream about an aggressive parrot. And yet, the drink lingered, quietly. Carthaginian merchants slipped it into smaller markets. Foreign traders returned home with wrapped bundles of pit powder, unsure whether they'd bought a beverage or an exotic pest deterrent. In some parts of southern Iberia, archaeological digs have uncovered burned date pits in what appear to be kitchen settings, alongside pottery, ash, and food remnants. It's not proof, exactly, but it's a whisper, a hint, a possibility that the drink traveled further than we thought. Shaped by new hands, flavored by new herbs, renamed again and again, until the original was almost unrecognizable. One Carthaginian trader you meet, his hands stained from handling dye, his tunic scorched at the edges, tells you, everyone wants what they don't understand. He wraps a small cloth pouch of roasted pit powder in oilskin and tucks it into a crate bound for Gaul. They'll call it medicine or punishment.
Here comes your quirky tidbit. In at least one port city, the brew was used as a kind of social test.
Guests would be offered a strong version, no sweetener, no straining. If they grimaced or gagged, they were considered untrustworthy. If they sipped and stayed quiet, they were welcomed. And if they asked for more, marriage material. You're not sure where you'd fall on that scale, but your tongue is still tingling. A dock worker nearby grins and says, "Don't drink it too close to sunset. Keeps your thoughts moving like fish in a barrel." You nod. Like fish, you say, unsure if it's a compliment or a warning. And here's your scholarly debate of the night. Some historians believe the Carthaginian date pit drink was a true proto-caffeine culture, an early attempt at stimulating the mind through roast and ritual. Others say it was mostly symbolic, a culinary quirk passed off as tradition. And a small but vocal third group insists the drink had spiritual or even psychedelic roots, citing fragmentary texts, dream accounts, and more than a few hallucination-heavy folktales. You sip again. The stars above the harbor shimmer faintly. A breeze rolls in, carrying the smells of seaweed, fish oil, and roasted seeds. The city behind you sleeps unevenly. As you watch the ships sway, you imagine them pulling away, carrying pit powder to strange markets, where no one knows what to do with it. Some will brew it wrong, some will burn it. A few, maybe, will discover something close to what you've tasted. Bitterness, heat, a kind of waking calm. You walk back from the dock with a small satchel of roasted pits tucked in your belt. For what? You're not sure. A souvenir, a ritual, a gift for someone who doesn't mind chewing sand. As the lanterns fade and the harbor settles, your mind drifts to all the cups you've tried, some sharp, some smoky, one with definite shell fragments. You're not tired yet, but you are steady, and in Carthage, that's good enough. You leave the harbor behind just as the first hints of dawn start brushing the horizon in smudgy pinks and purples. Carthage stirs again, slow, stretching, sighing. Somewhere a rooster preps for battle with its own echo. But you're not ready to rejoin the clamor just yet. You take a side path up a gentle hill, winding past sun-warmed stone, lazy cats, and the occasional stray sandal abandoned with zero context. At the top of the rise, you reach the ruins. Not the busy kind with guides and handouts, and people standing behind rope barriers. No, these are half swallowed by weeds, their edges softened by time, their stories carried now only in cracks and bird droppings. You step carefully between fallen columns and worn mosaics, bits of old Carthage whispered beneath your feet. A fig tree leans over one wall, unapologetically thriving. And waiting there, half hidden behind a mossy outcrop, is a little clay cup, still warm, still steaming. You pause, because this is obviously a trap, but there's no one else around. The birds are quiet. Even the wind seems politely hesitant. You sit, you lift the cup, you sip. It's familiar, a little bitter, a little earthy, definitely oversteeped, but comforting now, somehow. Not because the taste has improved, it hasn't, but because it brings with it all the footsteps that led here, all the marketplaces, the laughter, the strange recipes, the awkward philosophies, the people who stirred in herbs because their aunt told them to. This cup, left in a ruin, still warm, feels like a memory, one you weren't supposed to have, one that lingers. Here's your mainstream historical fact to hold in the steam. By the time Carthage truly fell, burned, rebuilt, renamed, and repurposed, the pit drink was already fading. Tastes changed. Coffee came eventually. Real caffeine. Stronger, smoother, marketed better. The old pit brew was tucked away in dusty corners, remembered only in the kitchens of grandmothers and the mutterings of herbalists who refused to modernize.
You look around. The city has changed 1,000 times since then. Most of its old bones lie underground, beneath apartment blocks and garden plots and ambitious archaeology students. But this drink, this cup, it persists, quietly, like a background hum, like a flavor nobody admits they miss. Your quirky tidbit? In one rural village not far from where Carthage once thrived, a local cafe still serves a version of the drink during winter festivals. They call it sunseed tea. It's sweetened now and spiced with cinnamon, and no one agrees on whether it's tradition or tourism. But when asked, the elderly cafe owner simply says, "It helps you sit still." And as you sit now, cup in hand, that feels entirely believable. Historians still argue whether anything resembling the original pit brew survived outside oral traditions. Most written records are vague, fragmentary. But then again, how do you trace something passed from cup to cup, generation to generation, mostly by accident? Maybe the drink wasn't a thing to document. Maybe it was just a moment, a flavor, a pause in a loud world. You lie back on a worn slab of stone, warm beneath your shoulders. The breeze carries faint traces of dust and fig leaves. A goat bleats in the far distance, either mourning or just dramatic. The cup rests on your chest, balanced perfectly. Your thoughts slow. And now, we soften the edges of the story. We let the world slip into gentler shapes. The drink doesn't need a name. It doesn't need a recipe or a label or a legacy. It was enough that people made it, shared it, complained about it. It was enough that it existed between tasks, between wars, between beliefs. A drink to help you sit, to help you think, to help you endure. Let yourself drift now. The ruins don't need explaining. The drink doesn't need reviving. The stars above you begin to fade behind morning's breath, and the fig tree's leaves sway like tired dancers. You take one last sip. The warmth spreads through your chest, not fire, not lightning. Just a quiet bloom. And that's where we leave it. Carthage behind you, the bitter drink beside you, and time, for once, on your side.
Let the tale rest in the arms of night, and let us follow the scent of another drifting through the dark.
We step into a world where smoky firelight flickers across wooden walls, and the scent of boiled meat, wet fur, and sea air clings to everything. You kneel, because chairs are for kings and backs that don't hurt. Beside a low, long table, sticky with age and stories, the hearth pops like it's trying to speak, and the room glows with a reddish breath. This isn't your usual dinner party. This is a Viking feast, and here, dinner isn't just food. It's a battlefield of status, superstition, and social survival. You probably won't survive this. You shuffle forward on fur-wrapped feet, careful not to step in the spilled ale from the earlier toast. The hall is full, warriors still creaking in their chainmail, women with their hair bound in beads, old men who haven't seen battle in a decade but can still outdrink a berserker. The table isn't set exactly. There are no plates, just slabs of wood or hardened bread trenchers acting as edible dishes. Everything smells of smoke, salt, and iron. The feast starts with silence, not because Vikings were polite, not really, but because food had weight. Sharing a meal meant trust, meant safety, meant maybe you weren't going to stab the person next to you tonight. That might sound dramatic, but when your tribe raids coastal villages for a living and blood feuds last generations, you take mealtime manners seriously. You tear off a hunk of bread, heavy, dark, and slightly burnt at the edges, and use it to scoop up a pile of stewed barley and stringy pork. No forks, just a wooden spoon if you're lucky, and your fingers if you're not. Spoons, interestingly enough, were often carved as gifts. Lovers might trade them, or a father might give one to a son before his first raid. That same spoon might end up beside him in his grave. Romantic, right? And then there's the seating. You think you can just plop down anywhere. Nope. Where you sit tells everyone everything. Who you're loyal to, who you fear, who you might be plotting against. The Jarl or chieftain sits at the head naturally. To his right, his most trusted men. To his left, his loudest ones. Farther down the table, you get the storytellers, the smiths, the cousins nobody likes but can't quite get rid of. And at the very end, that's where you're headed. Next to the guy with a beard so tangled it could trap mice, you start to eat carefully. Slurping is fine. Chewing with your mouth open? Not really. Talking while chewing? Risky. You listen instead. Stories are currency here. Every tale spun in this room adds something to the pecking order. You'll notice that the loudest men often talk the least during meals, waiting until the right moment to drop a line that makes everyone laugh or hush or glance nervously at the Jarl.
And yes, your fingers get greasy. There are no napkins. You wipe them on bread or on your tunic if you're low-born and don't mind being judged. Bread as napkin, bread as plate, bread as meal. The Vikings were nothing if not efficient. One man across from you slaps a boiled sheep's head onto the table like it's a prize. You don't flinch. That's good. It's a sign of manners. Hospitality was sacred. Once you entered a hall and shared food, you were owed protection, but only if you followed the rules. Don't reach for food before it's passed to you. Don't take the best cut unless it's offered, and absolutely do not under any circumstances criticize the cook. Even if the fish still has its eyes, even if the broth smells like a drowned rat in mead. Historians still argue whether every Viking feast followed strict ritual, or whether it depended more on the local customs of each clan. Some think the etiquette was codified, like laws whispered into ale-soaked wood. Others believe it was more instinctual, passed down through imitation and inherited glares. What's clear, though, is that meals weren't casual. Every bite had meaning. A woman with silver-threaded braids offers you a hunk of smoked reindeer. You nod politely, accept it with both hands. That matters, both hands. Using one implies reluctance or arrogance. You chew slowly. It's gamey and tough, but better than dried fish, which tastes like punishment. The hall's warmth is deceptive. Beneath the sweat and smoke, cold seeps up through the stone floor, and the long winter still howls just beyond the wooden walls. So you eat quickly, but you don't look rushed. That's a skill. The slow eater seems weak, the fast one greedy. You aim for the golden middle, efficient but respectful. Someone tells a joke about Thor getting stuck in a goat cart. You smile, though you barely understand it. The humor is dry, like their ale. Someone else snorts ale through his nose. This earns him a laugh and a slap on the back. He's clearly allowed to break etiquette once in a while. Must be nice. You glance at the Jarl. He hasn't eaten yet. No one near him has either. That's the rule. He lifts his horn slightly, a subtle cue. Now the main course begins. A boar, roasted whole and dripping fat onto a wooden trough, is carried in. You inhale. Your stomach rumbles. You're not alone. And as you bite into the charred edge of some unknown cut, you wonder, not for the first time, how much of Viking etiquette was about honor, and how much was just about surviving dinner without a knife in the ribs. The horn rises, and so does every gaze in the room. It's not just about drinking, it's about who drinks when, and how they are watched doing it. The Jarl lifts his own carved ox horn, thick as a child's leg and ringed with silver. It isn't the most ornate, but it's the first. Everyone waits. His lips meet the rim, and only then do others begin to lift their vessels. You, at your lowly spot near the edge of the hall, don't have a horn. You've got a wooden cup, maybe a little splintered, and definitely shared with someone whose name you forgot. But still, you raise it. This is the beginning of the toasts, or as the Norse called them, skal. And while you might think a toast is a cheerful clinking of glasses and a mumbled cheers, here it's a structured, almost sacred progression of statements, honorings, and unspoken tests. The first toast always goes to Odin. Or at least, that's the usual rule. Historians still argue whether Thor sometimes got bumped up in certain villages, especially if there had been storms recently or if the goats had been weird. But Odin is the All-Father, and his toast isn't optional. You raise your cup, say his name, maybe mutter a hope for wisdom or survival, and drink deeply. Not sipping, drinking. The second toast? That depends. Often it's to the king, if there is one. Sometimes to the Jarl, sometimes to fallen ancestors. This one has more flexibility. The point is, you must participate. Skipping a toast or pretending to drink marks you as either a coward, a traitor, or someone too sick to be worth feeding. and all three are bad. Drinking horns come in 1,000 shapes, some simple, some dripping with inlaid gems, etched with serpent motifs, capped with bronze. They're impractical, of course. You can't set one down without spilling, so you hold it until it's empty, or pass it carefully to the servant boy, who already has a mead stain shaped like Europe across his tunic. There's an unspoken rhythm here. Toasts follow stories, stories follow drinks, drinks follow silences. It loops like that, over and over, with the mead thinning your blood and the room softening at the edges. Your third cup is for friendship, or victory, or that one guy who finally paid back the debt he owed before he got run over by a horse. The third toast can be personal, but it's still better sound poetic. If you stand to give your skull and just mumble, to food I guess, someone's definitely throwing a bone at you. Toasting wasn't all spontaneous either. Some warriors rehearsed their toasts beforehand, like anxious best men at a wedding. Others relied on stock phrases, rhythmic, alliterative, easy to remember even when your skull's buzzing. And yes, there were designated skalds, poets, who sometimes delivered the really elaborate ones. But even the average sailor was expected to know a few lines that wouldn't make the goats blush.
There's also the horn passing ritual. The Jarl might lift his horn and send it clockwise. You only drink when it reaches you, not before. And if it passes you by, you nod as it goes, acknowledging the chain. That's the thing, every movement is part of a chain. Break it, and you might not get invited back. Or worse, someone might interpret your breach as disrespect and challenge you to a duel after dessert. Nothing ruins dessert like impending violence. A man next to you slams his cup down too hard. Mead splashes. Conversation falters for just a second. He mutters an apology and wipes the rim with his sleeve. The tension melts, just barely. Some toasts involve offerings, pouring a bit of mead onto the ground or into the fire. These aren't wasteful, they're respectful. The dead might be listening. The gods definitely are. And if you're caught drinking greedily without offering first, you'll be labeled selfish. Worse, unlucky. And you don't want to be the unlucky one on a ship bound for Scotland. Now, let's talk drinking games. Yes, they had them, but they weren't about beer pong or flip cups. Viking drinking games were more like tests of wit disguised as fun. Riddles, impromptu insults, memory contests. And if you fail, you don't just lose, you lose face. One popular game involved trading poetic insults back and forth, each one sharper than the last. The loser usually laughed it off. Sometimes they didn't. At one feast, an overeager farmhand challenged a seasoned skald to a toast duel. Yes, a toast duel, and was metaphorically dismembered with words about his sheep, his mother, and his suspiciously smooth hands. He laughed, but quietly. The etiquette gets stranger the longer you sit. There's an invisible clock ticking over every drink. If you drink too quickly, you're undignified. Too slowly, you're wasting everyone's time. You watch others, mimic their pace, match their nods. One eye always on the Jarl. Historians still debate whether women participated equally in toasts. Some evidence suggests they did, especially shield maidens and high-status wives. Others think women were mostly observers, serving the drinks and managing the food. But sagas mention women lifting horns and offering poetic words. So maybe, as with most things Viking, it depended on who you were, how sharp your axe was, and whether you knew how to rhyme.
You begin to feel warm now. Not just from the fire, but from the mead, sweet and thick, laced with herbs. One version contains yarrow, which supposedly makes you brave. Another has honey fermented in barrels that once held fish, bravery and a strong stomach. Someone makes a toast to Njord, god of the sea. Another to Freya, for love and fertility. The air hums with reverence and a little slurring. You feel your shoulders relax. This is the Viking version of peace. A noisy room, full bellies, sharp glances, and quiet rules keeping everything from erupting. Until someone messes up. He speaks out of turn. It's small, just a joke, too loud, right before the Jarl's cousin begins a serious remembrance of their uncle. The room stills. The offender raises his horn in apology, drinks deeply,
and bangs it to the floor with a thud. The Jarl grunts, and that's enough. The feast resumes. You sip your mead, grateful it wasn't you. Toasts continue. You begin to lose track of who's honoring whom, but it doesn't matter. You're part of the chain now, part of the hum, the heat, the rhythm of Viking respect, a rhythm you don't dare break. The mead has settled into your bones now, loosening your joints and warming your face. But you stay sharp, because the next thing past your way could test more than your appetite. A platter of meat is slid toward you. You can't quite identify what it is. Could be lamb, could be boar, could be something that once barked. Doesn't matter. You nod your thanks to the server and tear off a piece, remembering not to touch the central cut. That's for the honored guests, or the Jarl's brother, or whichever warrior is currently too wounded to walk but still ranking above you. You think the Vikings just ate whatever they could find. Well, sure, they weren't picky by modern standards, but every food item still came with a weird social code. Certain cuts were considered insulting to offer unless done ceremonially. Fatty meat was valuable and often reserved for people of higher rank. The brain, for example, eaten, yes, but rarely by anyone who wanted to seem serious. You pick the lean edge of the meat. Smart choice. Now come the side dishes. A thick stew of barley and root vegetables, a bowl of dried fish rehydrated in sour milk, some pickled cabbage that's traveled here by boat, probably twice. A man beside you dips a finger in his stew, tastes it, and nods solemnly before passing the bowl along. You mimic him exactly. This isn't mindless tradition. It's performance. Everyone here is watching everyone else for slips. Small, subtle gestures that might reveal disrespect, arrogance, or ignorance. Your posture, your chewing speed, even the angle of your arm as you pass a dish can say something about your place in this temporary candlelit kingdom. Rejecting food is delicate. You're full? Doesn't matter. Refusing a dish, especially if it's offered directly to you, is like saying, I don't trust your harvest. Or worse, your wife's cooking offends the gods. Even if the dish smells like sweaty boots soaked in vinegar, you take a bite, you nod, you keep chewing. Mushrooms are tricky. Some are edible, some are deadly. Some make you see visions of gods, longboats, or just your own regrettable life choices. There are stories, half jokes, half warnings, of warriors being served test mushrooms before raids to see how brave or expendable they were. Historians still argue whether that's truth or saga-born myth. You eye a bowl of diced fungi and opt for a single suspiciously shiny piece. It tastes like tree bark soaked in regret. You reach for a slab of cheese. It's hard, probably goat, and smells faintly of wet rope. Again, you nod. Cheese is neutral territory, unless of course it's part of an offering. Some feasts include a ceremonial cheese pass to honor Thor's strength. Don't laugh, it's sacred. You accept the offering, press it to your lips, and place it beside your bread trencher. See, you're learning. The man across from you makes a show of rejecting a dish. It's subtle. He pretends to be full, pats his belly, offers the bowl to someone else with a smile. That might fly, might not. Depends on who prepared it. Depends on who's watching. One woman nearby raises her eyebrows just slightly. A silent warning, or a silent laugh. You can't tell which. Not all feasts are equal. In wartime, meals are fast, silent, functional. During a blot, sacrificial ritual, they're laced with blood and meaning. But tonight is a victory feast. That means more variety, more risks. The cooks have probably spent days preparing this. Some dishes are pure show. Others, like the pickled herring in juniper brine, are tests of endurance. You get handed a small plate with what looks like dried lung. You don't ask, you chew. It's chewy. Someone across the hall lets out a satisfied grunt. You mimic it. It feels right. Now, on to food pairing. Vikings didn't exactly do wine and cheese boards, but they did have strong opinions about what should be eaten together. For example, salted meat with sour porridge was seen as balanced. Salt for strength, sour for wisdom. Sweet mead with raw onion? Only for fools or drunk cousins. The pairing rules aren't written, of course. They're absorbed.
learned from years of watching others get it wrong and suffer the polite silence of social death. And maybe a little side-eye from a shield maiden. Speaking of suffering, bones. When you finish a meat cut, don't just toss the bone. You stack it neatly, quietly. Tossing bones around is only allowed during certain games, or more rarely when someone tells a particularly bad poem. The stacking shows respect for the cook, for the animal, for the gods. You glance down at your small pile and rearrange it into a more respectable pyramid.
There's a sudden hush near the high table. A warrior has refused a bowl of lard and turnip mash. Flat refusal, just shook his head. You feel the tension before you even turn to look. The server freezes. The Jarl's daughter frowns. The warrior shrugs. Bold move. Could mean he's making a statement, or challenging the authority of whoever cooked it, or, more likely, just doesn't like turnips. Either way, it's a ripple in the calm. Later, there'll be whispers. Stories spun from this moment. People will remember. And that's the point. Every act at the table can become a tale. Who ate what? Who refused? Who accidentally swallowed a wishbone and coughed so hard he fell into the fire pit? Yes, that happened once. He survived. The wish didn't. There's a tiny dessert passed around, a sweetened barley cake with berries. It's rare. You savor it slowly, grateful. Not everyone gets one. Not every feast includes sweets. It's a nod to abundance, to survival, to a harvest not completely ruined by frost or raiders or goats with boundary issues. And still, despite the fullness in your belly and the rising warmth in your chest, you stay attentive. The etiquette never truly ends. Even when the plates are empty, the performance continues.
By now you're full.
But fullness doesn't grant immunity. If anything, it makes things trickier. With your belt loosened and the mead curling warm beneath your skin, you start to let your guard down, which is exactly when the subtle social tripwires start to tighten. The fourth course of Viking table etiquette isn't served on a platter. It lives in your burps, your brawls, and your boundaries. You shift on the bench. A little too loudly, a small creak. The man beside you grins, and then you burp. It escapes before you can stop it, echoing softly off the roof beams like a whale sighing through a horn. Silence. For a moment. Then someone chuckles. Then someone else lets out their own echo, and just like that, you've passed the first test of post-meal air diplomacy. Contrary to modern dinner manners, burping in a Viking hall wasn't considered inherently rude. In fact, a well-timed belch could be interpreted as a compliment to the cook. But, and here's the nuance, it had to be intentional, controlled, dignified, loud enough to be noticed, quiet enough to be respected. If you let one rip like you're trying to summon a dragon, that's when the trouble starts. There are whispered tales of a man named Ulfa Flattooth, who, after a heroic feast, belched so violently mid-skull that he passed out, head-butted his horn, and knocked himself unconscious. The story's funny. The exile afterward? Less so. Historians still argue whether it was the burp, the bruised jarl he fell on, or the ensuing fire that got him banished. Still, the rules were clear. Bodily noises could be part of the ritual, but only if performed with a kind of reverent mischief. You burp, nod, maybe raise your cup. A joke at your own expense helps. Anything to keep the rhythm of the room humming. But that humming sometimes escalates. The mead keeps flowing. And you start to hear it. Boots thudding under the table. A hand slaps a back too hard. Someone stands just a little too quickly. Feasts can be slow burn battles. The longer they go, the more chance someone crosses a line.
And when they do, that's when brawling etiquette kicks in. Yes, etiquette. Viking table fights weren't bar brawls. They had a strange, almost theatrical structure. No weapons, no deadly force, no chairs over the head. A punch, a shove, maybe a wrestle to the ground, yes. But only within bounds, and always watched. If you fight dirty, you're dragged out by the neck and made to serve stew for the next 3 moons. If you win, but do so too aggressively, congratulations. You've won one fight and lost everyone's respect.
You hear a raised voice near the far table, a loud accusation. Something about stolen firewood or a goat that wandered off during a storm. Hard to say. The language gets fuzzier after 3 cups. A man stands, chest puffed. Another pushes his bench back. Eyes narrow. This could get serious. But before it does, the Jarl himself slams his drinking horn on the table. Hard. The crack cuts through the air like a thunderclap. Instantly, both men freeze. A few seconds pass. Then, reluctantly, they nod to each other, mutter their apologies, and sit. That horn slam? It's a final warning. A subtle reminder that no matter how much mead you've had, or how many ghosts of your ancestors you think you're avenging, the feast is still sacred. Still, some battles go ahead. And when they do, the space clears. Not the whole hall, just a ring of watchers, leaning back, bread in hand, murmuring bets. The duel unfolds like a dance, slow circling, a push, a tumble, a grunt of pain, a cheek scraped against flagstone. Nothing fatal, just pride, flexed and bruised. And when it ends, both combatants are expected to sit down, share a drink, and pretend it never happened. The real punishment isn't injury. It's being remembered as someone who couldn't let go. As the air cools and the stew crusts at the edge of the trenches, another shift happens. The feast enters the boundary phase. It's like the invisible walls of the room get rearranged. People move closer. Some lean against pillars. Others rest their heads on the table, eyes half closed, still listening. But space becomes sacred. Touching someone's plate now, rude. Touching someone's horn, borderline insulting. Touching their beard, well, you might as well challenge them to a duel and skip straight to the bruising. You watch a man nudge his neighbor's cup accidentally. He freezes. The neighbor looks down. A beat passes. Then they both laugh, and the first man pours an extra splash of mead into the offended vessel. Balance restored. That's what matters, not perfection. You lean back, aware of your arms, your legs, your proximity to others. The woman beside you has her eyes closed, fingers idly tracing a rune into the table. You look away quickly. Don't stare. Don't interrupt. Some people are entering a kind of reverie, part drink, part spiritual closeness, part listening from messages from those long gone. Even laughter changes now. Earlier it was bold in bellowing. Now it's lower, breathier, inside jokes only. You hear one and laugh, even though you don't get it. That's etiquette too. There's one last burp from somewhere behind you. Loud, brazen. Everyone turns. The culprit, a boy no older than 15, shrugs proudly. A silence. Then applause. He's passed his test. Probably his first feast. Probably terrified. You remember that feeling. And so you breathe, chew one last piece of bread, and glance at your own modest cup. Still half full. You don't drink it. Not yet. Not until the next round of toasts. You rest it in both hands,
and let the silence between jokes settle over you like a soft fur blanket. Even in a room this crowded, this noisy, this chaotic, there are lines, thin as thread. You've walked them all night, teetering, balancing, learning, sometimes by accident, sometimes with luck, but mostly by watching, listening, noticing who laughs, who waits, who chooses to stay silent. And you begin to realize Viking table manners weren't about looking neat. They were about knowing your place without being told.
The hall quiets. Not into silence exactly, but into a hush that floats like wood smoke, thin and reverent. The flames in the long central hearth burn lower now, casting their light in slow golden sweeps. Shadows grow softer. The mead is still passed around, but slower, almost thoughtfully. The toasts begin to change too, not to gods or glory, but to memory. You sense it without being told. The feast has entered its final chapter. The laughter fades into murmurs, and somewhere near the Jarl's table an elder woman stands, no horn in hand, no food on her trencher, just a strand of polished bone beads in her fingers and a voice that rises like smoke from old pine. She begins to chant, not loudly, not theatrically, but with the weight of generations pressing into each word. You don't understand all of it. The Old Norse is thick, curling around syllables that haven't been spoken aloud in centuries. But you catch fragments. A name, a place, the sound of ice cracking underfoot. It's a story, and a remembrance, and an offering all at once. It's the kind of tale that doesn't ask for applause. It just wants to be heard. This is the toast to the dead, the unspoken rule that no Viking feast ends without acknowledging those who walked before. You notice people around you close their eyes, some resting a hand on their own chest, others tracing idle circles into the table with their thumbs. You mimic one of them, your hand on your own heart, not knowing exactly what it means, but knowing that it matters. A small bowl is passed to you. It's filled with something like ash and honey, earthy, sweet, strange. A ceremonial bite. Not delicious, but grounding. You swallow it. Everyone does. A symbolic act, some say. Others believe it helped bind you to the memory of the honored dead. Historians still argue whether this tradition was rooted in ancient Germanic funeral rites or came later as Christianity crept into the fjords and layered itself clumsily atop older beliefs. A young man rises with a small carved box and sets it gently near the hearth. Inside? You don't know. Nobody says. Could be a lock of hair, could be runes on bone, could be nothing. That's the mystery. The act is what matters. Everyone watches, everyone waits. And then the Jarl lifts his horn. Not fast, not grand, just slowly, steadily, and drinks. That's the cue. One by one, people around the room begin to raise their own cups. There's no announcement, no trumpet blast, no clink of utensils. Just that quiet, powerful swell of motion, like a wave rising, slow and silent, over an ancient shore. You lift your cup too. You whisper the name of someone, maybe someone real, maybe someone you've made up just for the moment. That's allowed. That's understood. The dead don't check credentials. The fire crackles. And now, finally, you drink. You feel it as you swallow. That last warm flood of mead sliding down your throat. Not to embolden, not to impress, just to remember.
A strange calm settles.
Even the dogs beneath the benches go quiet. The hall is full of people, but it feels vast, like you're sitting in a boat adrift in memory, with the stars above and the ancestors just below the surface of the dark, black sea. The feast winds down slowly, like a story that refuses to end. You don't leave right away. Nobody does. It would be rude. It would be hasty. Instead, people linger, some talking in low tones, others simply breathing, as if waiting for the food to settle into their bones. And you, too, linger. You look around one last time. The soot on the rafters, the gleam of oil on the meat tray, the half-chewed bread used as a napkin, the stack of bones at your feet arranged almost like a cairn. Everything here mattered, every bite, every burp, every word. And as you close your eyes, you realize
Viking table manners weren't about rules. They were about rhythm, a shared heartbeat, a soft contract between strangers, made holy by firelight and fermented honey. You feel sleep nudge the edge of your thoughts. You lean back. The Jarl nods toward the fire.
The tale is gone now, as all things go. But still the fire burns, and still my tongue remembers another. We tumble into the shadowy green silence of a forest long forgotten, where your shoes don't exist, your clothes are woven from river reeds, and the air smells like sweet rot and damp bark. You move quietly, because every leaf crunch feels like a shout. The trees stretch endlessly overhead, ancient and soft with moss, and somewhere in the distance, something, not quite a drum, not quite thunder, taps in slow rhythm. This is Mississippian land, around the year 1200 CE. And no, you probably won't survive this without at least one unfortunate encounter with poison sumac or prehistoric food poisoning. You are standing on soft, cool earth, near the base of an earthen mound taller than a 5-story building. Its slope is steep, its summit flat, and somewhere near the top, a council of people is maybe deciding the fate of a village, or maybe just arguing about a particularly juicy squirrel. Historians still argue whether these mounds were political stages, spiritual portals, or just very intense landscaping projects. Either way, their presence looms over the fertile floodplains of the Mississippi Valley. Near the base of this mound, neat rows of corn, maize, stand swaying in quiet unity. Each stalk towers above your head, and their rustling makes you think of whispers, or maybe someone gossiping about your terrible leaf-weaving skills. But this is no ordinary cornfield. This is the crop that shaped civilizations. The Mississippian peoples didn't invent maize. That genius came earlier from Mesoamerican farmers who took a wild grass called teosinte and bullied it over thousands of years into something edible. But the Mississippians did take maize and run with it, planting it in vast monocultures, timing their entire calendars around its growth, and feeding cities that rivaled medieval London in size. You stoop to touch the soil, dark, rich, and full of stories. This ground isn't naturally fertile. It's been worked, amended, sometimes with fish bones, sometimes with charcoal and ash. It took centuries of trial and error to get these fields right. Which means somewhere, way back, someone probably ruined a whole harvest because they forgot which fish guts were good fertilizer and which ones just made everything smell like regret. The village near you hums with quiet activity. A group of children is chasing each other with dried maize husks, giggling in the kind of laughter that transcends centuries. An elder squats near a fire pit, grinding maize into meal using a worn stone that looks like it's seen better millennia. You sit beside her. She nods without looking up, as if to say, "Yes, traveler from the future. Your socks are strange, but you can stay." Cornmeal porridge simmers over the fire. Thick, slow bubbles, rising like lazy thoughts. Someone has added berries to it, and the color turns an unsettling mauve. You taste it. It's gritty, slightly sweet, and warm in a way that makes your stomach remember what real hunger feels like. This isn't snack food. This is architecture food. Food that builds towns and temples and reasons to keep going when the river floods again. But it's not all just corn porridge and quiet dignity. Some of the maize is roasted directly on the cob, blackened slightly, wrapped in husks, then set near coals to steam. Other kernels are parched, popped in clay pots, though not exactly like modern popcorn. You try some. It's chewy, smoky, and, honestly, a little disappointing. Like if someone tried to make popcorn but forgot joy. Nearby, A woman sprinkles ash into her flour, an early form of nixtamalization. You blink, confused. She's doing chemistry, on purpose. See, untreated maize lacks niacin, and if you eat only corn without releasing that B vitamin, you might develop pellagra, a disease that causes madness, rashes, and death. Fun bedtime thought, right? But somewhere in their history, Mississippians figured out that adding alkaline substances like wood ash made corn safer and more nutritious. How did they learn that? Did someone eat porridge seasoned with fireplace dust on a dare and accidentally invent a life-saving process? Historians still argue whether it was accident, trade knowledge, or divine inspiration from a very bored raccoon spirit. You walk again, away from the village, to a small clearing where the maze tapers off. The transition from farmland to forest is abrupt, like stepping from civilization into myth. But even here, maize finds its way. Volunteers, stray plants from last season, pop up between trees, defiant and golden, refusing to go quietly. A man sits cross-legged near a creek, whittling a flute and watching the forest edge. Corn spirits live in the wind, he tells you without looking up. You nod solemnly, because that feels like the kind of thing you're supposed to nod solemnly at. Whether he's speaking metaphorically or literally, you're not sure. Either way, the wind does pick up, and yes, the rustle does sound a little like laughter. Back near the mound, the sun is lowering. A line of people ascends the slope, carrying baskets of roasted corn and flower garlands. You trail behind, half invited, half invisible. At the summit, the platform is ringed with fire pits and stone seats. Someone sings in a language you don't recognize, and a small child offers you a charred cob on a stick, like an ancient corn dog with none of the joy and all of the symbolism. You bite into it, careful not to grimace. It's dry, tough, and a little burnt, but somehow it feels sacred. Because you're not just eating roasted corn, you're eating memory, ritual, the echo of 1,000 harvests carried on the breath of forgotten prayers. One of the elders begins speaking, slow, rhythmic, like waves against a riverbank. You don't understand the words, but you understand the feeling, gratitude, continuity, a quiet fear that the river might flood again next spring, and a hope that the corn will still grow tall when it does. You lie back, staring at the sky above the mound, which is now streaked with firelight and stars. Somewhere in your pocket, you probably still have a granola bar from the gas station. But tonight, that doesn't matter. You've eaten what the forest offered. You've sat where people made cities out of dirt and kernels. And as the wind moves through the maze below, it whispers, not in English, but in rustles and hushes, that it remembers you. The light fades fast beneath the forest canopy, and now you're navigating by feel more than sight. The air is cooled, a little damper than before, and your feet brush against leaves, moss, and something suspiciously sticky. You ignore it. Best not to ask questions out here. The mound and the village are behind you now, swallowed by distance and vines, and ahead lies the deep, nutty heart of the forest. You're entering a pantry built by nature, stocked for those with patience and strong jaws. You pass a tree with bark like elephant skin and broad, spreading limbs. A hickory. It's dropping nuts like it's trying to knock you out cold. You duck and scoop one up. The shell is thick, gnarled, and deeply unwilling to cooperate with your modern sensibilities. Somewhere in the past, someone decided this was worth eating, and you've got to wonder about their mental state. Still, with a bit of fire, some heavy pounding, and more determination than any food item truly deserves, the hickory nut reveals a buttery interior that tastes like a cross between pecan and survival instinct. Crack enough of them, and you can make hickory milk, pounded nut meat mixed with hot water, then strained through woven grass mats. The result is a creamy, smoky liquid used for stews, cornmeal, or just sipping if you're fancy and don't mind a bit of floating bark. It's oddly good, like if almond milk were made by someone who really knew how to start a fire. Historians still argue whether hickory nuts were a staple or a seasonal treat.
Some camps say they were survival food for lean months. Others think entire feasts revolved around cracking, roasting, and drinking this forest brew. Either way, your hands are now sticky, your shirt smells faintly burnt, and there are 3 squirrels watching you with mounting disappointment. You press deeper into the trees, and your path becomes a little crunchier. You step over fallen chestnut pods, their burrs sharp and spiny like nature's caltrops. Before the chestnut blight swept North America in the 20th century, these forests were filled with towering trees that dropped nuts like clockwork. Imagine autumn as a chaotic symphony of thunking chestnuts and shouting gatherers with woven baskets and sore backs. These chestnuts weren't the sweet, roasted variety you might know from winter markets. They were meatier, starchier, and often ground into meal. You'd mix them with acorn flour and hickory milk to make something dense, nutty, and just barely chewable. It wasn't cake, it wasn't bread, but it was brown and solid and probably warm, so close enough. You break for a moment under a large tree. This one's a black walnut, and it's not here to make your life easy. Walnuts are delicious, sure, but their husks stain everything they touch, your fingers, your clothes, your soul. Try cracking them open and you'll discover that walnuts are really just tiny tanks with snack centers. The Mississippians used stone tools and time and technique to open them. You try using a rock and just end up with pulp and shame. Somewhere nearby, a group of villagers is singing. You creep toward the sound and find them seated in a circle, each with a different kind of nut in hand. This, you realize, is a nutting party, not the exciting kind, just the communal processing of tree snacks, which still somehow turns into storytelling, flirtation, and mild political intrigue. A woman to your left flirts outrageously over a particularly symmetrical acorn. You're not sure if this is forest romance or just extreme boredom. Speaking of acorns, they're everywhere, underfoot, in piles, hidden like little landmines of tannin and indigestion. Raw acorns are bitter, like mouth-drying, eye-twitching bitter. But soak them long enough, days, even weeks in running water, and they become soft, floury, and edible. The tannins leach out, leaving something that can be dried, ground, and turned into porridge, cakes, or an early form of protein bar. You try a bite of one. It tastes like paper, but comforting paper. Paper that might hug you back if you're sad enough.
There's a quirky tidbit here, by the way. Some Mississippian groups would roast acorns with hot stones in a pit, almost like ancient popcorn. Others just buried them in the mud and waited. One method gives you soft, usable acorns. The other gives you fermented sludge, which, let's be honest, someone probably still ate. The fire is starting again as twilight thickens around you. People share small bowls of ground nut stew, seasoned with salt, scraped from evaporated river water, and a few wild herbs you can't identify, but decide not to question. It's earthy, bitter, and surprisingly hearty. You chew slowly, watching the steam rise, mixing with the smell of moss and burnt shell. A child hands you something flat and brown. It looks vaguely like bread, smells vaguely like tree, and tastes vague. It's acorn flatbread, baked over hot stones and topped with crushed sunflower seeds. That's right. Sunflowers weren't just for Instagram photos and snack bars. These people crushed their seeds, pressed them into oil, using carved wooden mortars, and drizzled the golden result over food like proto-gourmands. You try some. It's nutty, oily, and makes your lips slick with ancient fat. Historians still debate whether these seeds were a culinary staple or used more ritually, pressed into skin, burned in lamps, or smeared on idols. Tonight, though, it's just drizzled onto your weird tree nut bread, and that's enough. You recline back against a fallen log, stomach full of things that don't quite qualify as dinner in your century, but which clearly did the job for generations. The night forest hums with crickets, wind, and the occasional squirrel throwing shade. There's no glowing fridge here, no gas stove or microwave. Just you, a bowl of mashed nuts, and a whole society, built on knowing exactly when a tree was ready to give.
The sun has dipped beneath the trees and now the forest breathes in slow, deep rhythms. You move quietly through the underbrush, crunching twigs and brushing aside brambles like someone in a nature documentary who definitely forgot bug spray. The village sounds have faded. Out here it's just you and the plants. Some edible, some deadly, and some confidently pretending to be both. Welcome to the world of Mississippian greens. Foraged, bitter, and probably better than your salad. You stop at a shallow stream. Its water curls around rocks smoothed by centuries of fish and feet. And tucked along the banks, a cluster of green leaves catches your eye. They're tall, arrow-shaped, and swaying slightly like they're daring you to pluck them. This is polygonum, or smartweed, and you're not sure if it's edible or preparing to ruin your weekend. The locals know, of course. You don't. But you pluck a few anyway, because it's bedtime history. And you're committed to the bit. Smartweed, pokeweed, and goosefoot. These aren't just weeds, they're wild greens rich in vitamins and sass. Boiled once, they're food. Boiled wrong, they're regret. Mississippians gathered them by hand, sorting the edible from the absolutely not, using knowledge passed down by firelight, and trial and error you wouldn't wish on your worst roommate. Historians still argue whether these greens were diet staples or emergency filler. Either way, they kept people fed, especially in spring, when other food was running out and winter's mood had overstayed its welcome. Further along the stream, you find amaranthus or pigweed. It's like spinach's tough cousin, hardy, slightly bitter, and surprisingly nutritious. You chew a leaf, it tastes green. Not fresh garden green, more like you forgot the dressing green. But boiled with hickory milk or tossed into hot cornmeal, it becomes something close to soup. Warm, rough textured, and exactly the kind of meal that reminds you you're not in a restaurant. Or the 21st century. Someone beside you is chopping the stems of cattails. These plants, rooted in the mud, offer edible shoots and rhizomes, the forest's answer to starchy side dishes. Peeled, sliced, and lightly cooked, the white cores resemble chewy celery with a hint of swamp optimism. You nibble one. It's not bad. Crunchy, wet, and slightly sweet, like a vegetable that hasn't figured itself out yet. Quirky tidbit. Cattails also provide fuzz. Like a lot of fuzz. That soft brown fluff on the tops. It's not just for decoration. It was used as insulation, tinder, and padding in shoes. One imaginative soul even used it as pillow stuffing, which means the Mississippians technically invented the world's least supportive Tempur-Pedic. Your path takes you through a low, marshy area now, where the ground sucks at your feet with each step. Frogs croak warnings. Dragonflies buzz past like tiny surveillance drones. Here, Sagittaria grows, duck potato, or wapato if you want to feel fancy. It's a root veggie, lumpy and starchy, hiding just beneath the muck. Mississippian foragers duck for them with sharpened sticks, working barefoot and muddy while watching for snakes. You watch too, mostly for snakes. You pluck a duck potato and hold it in your palm. It looks like an anxious turnip. Cooked over a fire, it turns soft and nutty, like a cross between chestnut and boiled couch cushion. You eat it anyway. This is what your ancestors did to survive. And also possibly to prove a point. A woman nearby is collecting spice bush leaves, aromatic little ovals with a citrusy smell when crushed. She smiles as she bundles them into a basket, clearly recognizing your tourist confusion. These leaves go into teas, stews, or just get chewed for fun. Or because everything else tastes like mud-dipped kale. You follow her back toward a campsite where someone is stirring a pot that smells complicated. The aroma hits somewhere between vegetable stew and wet backpack. You peer in. It's a mix of greens, goosefoot, lamb's quarters, stock, and a few brave fiddleheads. The broth is thickened with acorn flour and hickory milk, seasoned with crushed spice bush and maybe a pinch of dried crayfish. You take a tentative sip. It tastes exactly how you'd expect a prehistoric spring cleanse to taste. Earthy, bitter, slightly gamey, and oddly comforting. Historians still argue whether these forest stews were everyday fare or reserved for ceremonial fasts and healing rituals.
Some speculate that they were intentionally bitter, to purge, to cleanse, to remind you that comfort wasn't the point. Food, here, wasn't always pleasure. Sometimes it was philosophy, or penance, or just a reminder that you were alive and could still chew.
You rest near a fire, your bow empty, your mouth faintly green. A child brings you something wrapped in leaves. You unwrap it slowly, half expecting a spider. Instead, you find a patty of mashed greens and ground seeds, sun-dried and slightly crumbly. You bite in. It's bland, astonishingly bland, like if kale and cardboard had a quiet child. But it fills your belly, and that's the point. Nearby, an older woman places wet leaves onto hot stones, pressing them flat with a carved paddle. Steam rises. She's making green cakes, primitive but effective. When done, she smears them with a paste made from ground wild onion bulbs and wild ginger. Now that's flavor, just a bit spicy, a bit sweet, and a welcome change from the ongoing parade of green and bitter. She catches your eye and grins, handing you one. Good for the blood, she says. You nod, chewing slowly, as if understanding ancient forest nutrition were something you've always done. But really, you're just grateful for something that tastes like it had a seasoning plan. As you lie back against a mossy rock, belly full of herbs and swamp tubers, you think about what it takes to learn a landscape like this. The time, the memory, the risk of chewing the wrong leaf and getting an unplanned vision quest. These plants weren't just food, they were experience. Proof that someone had been here before and lived long enough to say, "Don't eat that, seriously." The firelight flickers. A breeze carries the scent of cooked greens and cattail smoke. You close your eyes, still tasting the slight zing of wild ginger on your tongue. Out here, surrounded by weeds that saved lives and leaves that meant survival, you realize something calming. You're full. You're safe, and the forest, somehow, remembers.
Somewhere deeper in the woods, a fire crackles low, sending a soft column of smoke into the night sky. You make your way toward it, guided by flickering light and the savory scent of roasting meat. Something richer than plants, more primal than porridge. Your stomach stirs again, which is honestly impressive given the amount of swamp vegetables you just swallowed. But this time, it's not greens on the menu. It's meat, and mushrooms, and maybe bugs. You've made it to the part of the forest where things crunch for a reason. You settle by the fire just as someone flips a strip of venison on a stone slab. It sizzles, and the scent is mouth-watering, smoky, earthy, tinged with a glaze made from crushed blackberries and wild honey. Someone hands you a small wooden skewer with a piece of it. You bite in. It's chewy, flavorful, and, dare you say, delicious. Venison was a staple for Mississippian peoples. Deer were plentiful in these forests, and hunting them was both ritual and necessity. They used bows tipped with stone arrowheads, tracked deer through marshes, and sometimes baited them with salt licks or corn. But it wasn't just about meat. Antlers became tools, sinew became cord. Nothing was wasted. You chew the meat slowly, picturing a time when every bite was earned with patience, silence, and a whole lot of mosquito bites. A few feet away, someone lifts a woven basket from the coals. Inside, wrapped in leaves, are crayfish. Bright red, steaming, and curled into question marks. They're plucked from riverbeds using baskets or hand-woven traps. You crack one open, carefully, and slurp the salty tail meat. It's like a freshwater version of shrimp, slightly muddy, definitely chewy, but oddly satisfying. Mississippians didn't just hunt on land. They fished with spears, nets, and woven traps, sometimes even creating temporary dams to herd fish into shallow pools. And occasionally,
they'd gather at night to boil crayfish or turtles, telling stories as steam rose from the water like ghosts. Historians still argue whether crayfish were a delicacy or just convenient protein for those who didn't feel like chasing deer that day. Either way, you're grateful someone decided it was worth the effort. Next, someone passes you a roasted bird, small, charred, and vaguely recognizable. Maybe duck. Maybe pigeon. Possibly. Not worth asking. You nibble at the crispy skin. It's smoky and oily. A reminder that waterfowl once filled these rivers and lakes in flocks so large they darkened the sky. Hunting birds was a seasonal celebration, and feathers were used for ceremonies, clothing, and, according to one fringe theory, makeshift fans. Because even in the past, people hated sweating in public.
Your firemate gestures to a log where several mushrooms are laid out to dry. Pale caps, golden frills, one that's a vibrant orange and smells faintly of nutmeg. You raise an eyebrow. Mushrooms, in any era, walk a thin line between savory delight and hallucinating in a ditch. But the Mississippians knew their fungi. Well, most of the time. There's chanterelle, morel, boletus, some safe, some sacred, some suspicious. You try a dried sliver of morel. It's earthy, rich, and slightly chewy, like beef that went to art school. Someone laughs and adds a dab of rendered bear fat to the mix. You stare at them, they shrug. It's seasonal. Quirky tidbit. One oral tradition hints that certain mushrooms were used not just for food, but for vision quests. Rituals to contact ancestors or spirits through guided fasting, drumming, and the occasional fungus-fueled revelation. Historians still argue whether these psychedelic traditions were widespread or isolated. But tonight, you're just hoping the mushroom in your hand isn't about to send you on a spirit journey through time and bad decisions. You reach for something safer, a roasted grub, not joking. It's handed to you on a flat piece of bark, crisped at the edges and smelling faintly nutty. It looks exactly like what your instincts tell you not to eat, but you chew. It's crunchy, warm, and, honestly, not bad. Like a peanut that dreamed of being a snack, Mississippians used insects as emergency protein. Wasps, cicadas, even crickets, all roasted, ground, or sometimes just eaten. Children learned to identify edible species young, and some adults claimed favorites. One elder in the village swears by toasted wasp larvae, says it's good for your bones. You smile politely and try not to imagine the texture. Someone brings over a pot, a rich stew of venison, wild onion, and mushrooms thickened with nut flour and seasoned with sumac. You scoop a serving with a carved bone spoon. The broth is smoky, savory, and full of subtle bitterness from forest herbs. This is not a quick dinner. It's hours of hunting, gathering, and cooking. In a clay vessel that has cracks, patched with sap and fiber.
The Mississippians didn't have metal, but their cooking tools were works of art. Coiled clay pots, fire darkened at the base, bone spatulas polished smooth with years of use, and woven baskets lined with clay slip to waterproof them. You stir your stew with reverence. Every chip in the bowl feels like it holds a memory. Across the fire, someone sings, a quiet tune, low and rhythmic. You don't understand the words, but the melody weaves through the smoke like a story. Around you, bowls are emptied, bones are cleaned, and someone throws a deer scapula onto the flames to crack and burn away any spirits who might have followed dinner home. One woman kneels beside the fire, carefully arranging a collection of food, venison, greens, a tiny cup of water, onto a flat stone. It's an offering, maybe to ancestors, maybe to the forest itself. Historians still argue whether these food offerings were everyday practice or reserved for special rituals, but the gesture feels timeless. You finish your stew, licking the spoon out of sheer politeness and hunger, and set the bowl down. Your breath is warm in the night air, your body heavy with calories and history. Tonight you've eaten what the forest gave, not just what it offered freely, but what had to be coaxed, chased, caught, and cleaned. You feel full, not just in your stomach, but in your chest. Like something old and deep has nudged you closer to itself. And as the last embers fade to red, and someone quietly begins to drum on a hollow log, you think, maybe that grub wasn't half bad after all.
The fire's almost out now. Just a few pulsing coals cradled by ash, and the forest around you has grown soft with night sounds. You can hear the whisper of wind through tall trees, the far-off trill of something frog-shaped, and the low rustle of someone folding up a reed mat behind you. You're full, your limbs are warm, and your brain is settling into that fuzzy, almost sleep space. But there's one more part of this journey. How food became more than survival. How it became story, symbol, and spectacle. You follow a small procession up a wooded hill, feet sinking gently into moss as the group moves silently. The moon is high now, silvering the path ahead, and someone carries a bundle of bark-wrapped tea leaves. Another has a carved bowl of what looks like ashes, comforting. At the top of the hill is a small clearing. It doesn't look like much. A circle of stones, a low platform made of woven saplings, and a few bowls placed carefully at the edges, but the air hums with intention. This isn't just dinner, it's ceremony. You sit cross-legged on the ground, the bark tea is passed around, and you cradle the warm cup in your hands. It smells sharp and smoky, with a strange edge of citrus. The tea is made from Ilex vomitoria, Yaupon holly, the only native caffeine plant in North America, yes, really. Mississippians used it in purification rituals, sometimes drinking huge quantities and vomiting deliberately, hence the unflattering Latin name. But this batch is tame, just enough to wake your thoughts without making your stomach question its life choices. You sip. It's bitter, slightly tannic, but smooth, with an aftertaste that reminds you of roasted chestnuts and damp pine needles. Someone near you adds a drop of honey and swirls it in with a twig, very rustic barista energy. The fire in the center of the circle is lit now, and a slow rhythm begins, a low drum beat, steady as breath. A few people stand, their faces painted with ash and berry dye, and begin to move in time. Their dance is slow, more like swaying than motion, and the food is at the center, literally. Bowls of nuts, bits of roasted meat, bundles of herbs, and folded greens are arranged in a careful spiral. You realize, slowly, that this isn't just a dance around food. It's a dance for food. The Mississippians treated food as ceremony. Meals marked seasons, births, deaths, marriages, droughts, and celebrations. Eating was often communal, wrapped in symbolism. The first ear of corn wasn't just picked, it was honored, sometimes buried, sometimes offered to ancestors. The first fish of the season might be set aside for the spirits of the river. Food wasn't just calories, it was currency, medicine, and message. Historians still argue whether these rituals had fixed rules or changed constantly between regions and generations. But what's clear is that every bite carried meaning. A roasted duck was not just dinner, it might represent the return of spring. A bitter green might be a reminder to honor endurance. Even a grub, yes, that grub, could be a sign of resilience, a token of we eat what we must and we survive anyway. Someone approaches you with a lump of mashed nuts and sunflower oil shaped into a small, round cake. It's dense, a little oily, and pressed with a thumbprint in the center. You eat it slowly. It's not sweet, not savory, just there, grounding, like edible calm. And it's passed to you with a nod of quiet recognition, as if to say, you're part of this now too. A bowl of charcoal is placed in the center of the fire ring. From it, someone draws a small line across your forehead with an ashen fingertip. You flinch instinctively, but then settle. It's a ritual blessing, something old, probably religious, possibly just dramatic. But in that moment, it feels real, not performative, not spooky, just ancient and steady and kind. There's a story being told now, quietly, in a language that rolls like river stones. You don't understand the words, but the cadence wraps around you like a lullaby. You pick up pieces. A fox who tricked a deer,
a boy who became a tree, a grandmother who fed the stars with persimmon bread. Every story involves food, or ends in food, or is food in some abstract, dreamlike way. And that, you realize, is the secret. The Mississippian forest wasn't just a place to find things to chew. It was a teacher, a keeper of knowledge. Every root dug, every nut cracked, every bird caught. It all told you who you were, where you were, and how long your people had been walking these woods. The dance ends, the fire settles. People begin to curl onto mats or lie on their sides with blankets of woven grass. You do the same. The Yopon tea hums quietly in your blood. Your breath is slow, and the final image in your mind is of a forest table, set with moss, nuts, fish, berries, smoke, and memory. You've walked through forgotten fields. You've chewed bitter greens and swallowed ancient tea. You've sat in circles where food became history and history became a whisper. You've been fed by a forest that no longer exists, but that maybe, just maybe, still dreams somewhere under the soil. Now hush, for the story has slipped beneath the soil. Another rises, carried on the wings of dusk. We're stepping back into a place that smells like rosemary, hot iron, and just a little fear. You're here for a haircut, maybe a shave, maybe something a bit more invasive. Welcome to a 15th century German barber shop. Equal parts grooming station and emergency clinic, all bundled into one warm, smoky room. The tools are real, the blades are sharp, and the calming techniques? Well, they're creative. You probably won't survive this. Kidding. Probably. The door creaks open and you shuffle inside. The thick wooden threshold is worn smooth from centuries of footsteps, and the room hits you like a sensory wave. Warm candlelight flickering off bronze razors, a haze of herbal smoke drifting toward the ceiling, and beneath it all, the metallic scent of steel, and something slightly meaty. You decide not to question it. A fire crackles in a small hearth to your left, casting orange shadows across jars of dried plants, and a stack of rags that look suspiciously like bandages. Above the mantel, someone's nailed a chicken foot, tied with twine and dangling like a festive ornament. Is it for protection, decoration, leftovers? Historians still argue whether charms like these were based in real spiritual belief, or simply habits passed down without question. Either way, you avoid standing under it. The barber greets you with a nod. He's older than you expected, with sleeves rolled up and hands that look more like a blacksmith's than a hairdresser's. His apron is stained, but clean enough to suggest some level of professionalism. He doesn't ask what you need. He simply gestures to a wide, creaky wooden chair, beside a basin of water and some rolled towels. You sit. First things first, a warm cloth across your face. It smells of thyme and mint, soft against your skin, as the heat melts away the tension in your forehead. The cloth has a surprising weight to it, and for a moment, you close your eyes. No clippers buzz, no fluorescent lights hum, just the crackle of the fire and the gentle scrape of something being sharpened on a whetstone nearby. The barber lifts the cloth, then reaches for a comb carved from bone. He hums a little tune, no lyrics, just a series of steady notes, and begins brushing your hair back. You realize quickly, this is not just grooming, this is ritual. Everything is slow and methodical. You're not just getting a shave, you're being prepared. This shop is many things to many people, a medical center, a gossip hub, sometimes even a place for minor confessions. Because in these times, the line between barber and surgeon is almost non-existent. Yes, he can trim your beard, but he's also trained, loosely, in pulling teeth, setting bones, and draining infections. Think of him as your small-town therapist, who also lances boil. One of the most famous symbols of this row, the red and white barber pole, comes from this era. The red represented blood, the white stood for bandages. And if you saw one spinning outside a shop, you knew the barber inside could cut your hair or open your vein. But before we get to anything bloody, you're noticing the space around you.
The walls are cluttered with tools, shears, razors, clamps, a few tools that honestly look more like gardening equipment. Each one is polished and nestled into its leather loop or cloth wrap. He seems proud of them, like a chef displaying his knives or a wizard laying out spell components. Beside the tool wall, there's a little side table. On it, dried flowers bundled in twine, a feather, a flask, and what might be a leech jar. The flowers are probably for fragrance or distraction. The flask is definitely for nerves. The leeches, well, let's not think too hard about those just yet. The barber gestures toward the flask and raises his brows, as if asking if you'd like a sip. You nod. What else can you do? He pours a measure into a tiny cup made of horn. The liquid is sharp and earthy, wine probably, though it has the bite of something mixed with roots or bark, a sort of medieval, nervous customer cocktail. It burns going down, but leaves you feeling just a little more detached. You're beginning to float, just slightly, above the anxiety that rode in on your shoulders. Historians still debate whether these shops were places of fear or familiarity. Was it the dread of pain that kept people quiet in the chair, or the ritual comfort of it all? In truth, probably both. Like a dentist visit today, there's unease, sure, but there's also something reassuring about watching a professional move confidently through a routine. Especially when he's wielding a straight razor with centuries of tradition behind him. He begins to lather your face, whisking the soap into a rich foam. The brush is soft, badger hair maybe, and the smell is surprisingly pleasant. You catch a hint of rosemary, maybe something citrusy. You're aware of every motion, the soft bristles swirl, the heat of his hand steadying your chin, the rhythmic scraping of steel against leather as he sharpens the blade just out of sight. You think for a brief moment about standing up, but your body doesn't move. The room is too warm, the cloth too soft, the wine too mellow. You've surrendered. And that, right there, is the first true success of the 15th century barber's calming technique. Disarm the senses. Make the body comfortable enough that the mind forgets to panic. And before you know it, the blade touches skin. But that comes later. For now, you're drifting, wrapped in steam, scented soap, and something not quite safety, but something close enough to sleep.
You stay still, not from bravery, but because the warmth and the ritual have numbed your usual instincts. The barber's chair isn't cushioned, but something about the way it creaks beneath you feels reassuring, like it survived worse customers than you. He adjusts your head with the care of someone positioning a loaf of bread, and then leans in with the blade. You feel the cool press of metal just below your ear. There's a pause, like he's waiting for you to flinch, but you don't. That's the trick. The lull has worked. And now, he talks. Not about what he's doing. He never mentions the blade, or the angle, or how close it is to your carotid. Instead, he tells you a story about a goat that wandered into the town chapel last week and refused to leave. How the priest tried holy water, then bread, then eventually just gave up and declared the goat an unscheduled pilgrim. It's a good story. Ridiculous, but exactly the kind of thing you want to hear when a man with sharp tools is hovering near your neck. Talk was one of the barber's greatest weapons against fear. Not deep conversations, not existential musings, just everyday nonsense. Weather, livestock, maybe a neighbor's suspiciously long absence. The kind of talk that nudges your attention just far enough from the situation at hand. This was common practice. In many towns, barbers were expected to be good conversationalists. You didn't just trust them with your blood. You trusted them to make you laugh while they took it. There are even scattered records suggesting that a barber's social skills mattered more than their surgical ones when it came to customer loyalty. Historians still argue whether the small talk served more to distract the client
or reassure them through familiarity? Was it diversion, or was it emotional anesthesia? Either way, it worked. You're smiling a little now, because the goat apparently headbutted a pew and left with a hymnal. And then, music. It's faint at first, drifting in from a side room. A lute, probably, or maybe a hurdy-gurdy. Something stringed, something delicate. Not a full concert, just a gentle, continuous trickle of notes, as soothing as a stream. This was another trick barbers used in the 1400s. Larger shops, especially in cities, might hire musicians or apprentice players to perform softly in the background during more intense procedures. Not only did it mask unpleasant sounds, it gave customers something to latch onto with their minds. Something besides the sharp tug of a tooth or the warm slide of a razor. You find yourself following the melody, letting it pull you along like a current. The notes rise, then fall, then linger, weaving around the rhythm of the barber's movements. Every once in a while, he hums along, never loudly, always in tune. Next comes the tonic. You're not sure when he poured it, but there's a new cup in your hand now. Something milky, something herbal. You sip it because what else are you going to do? It's bitter, but not in a bad way. Like crushed mint and tree bark and something floral you can't name. You feel your shoulders drop. Tonics were a mainstay of the medieval barber's toolkit. Some were basic, wine boiled with sage or cloves. Others, more elaborate, involved steeping crushed roots, resins, even poppy seeds, though not enough to knock anyone out completely, just enough to mellow the edges. You suspect this one might have a hint of wormwood, maybe valerian. You're definitely less worried about the man with the blade now. At this point, you're basically putty in the chair. You don't even mind when he asks you to tilt your head slightly and lifts your chin. You just comply, calmly, gently, like a sleepy marionette. You remember hearing about this somewhere, how barbers were the unofficial nerve-calming experts before modern anesthesia. People trusted them not just to cut, but to keep the cutting from feeling quite so real. And then, just as the razor skims the first layer of lather from your neck, the barber tells a joke. It's not a good one. Something about a monk, a chicken, and a bucket of eels. The punchline doesn't even make sense, but you laugh anyway, because it's the rhythm, not the words, that distract you. And honestly, that's the point. Barbers develop this multitasking performance. A little comedy, a little music, a lot of eye contact. Their timing mattered as much as their technique. The goal wasn't to make the pain go away. The goal was to make the moment go away and replace it with something a little ridiculous, a little off-key, and entirely human. You hear someone in the next room sneeze violently. The barber calls out, "Still alive?" The sneezer replies, "Barely." And everyone chuckles, because in 15th century Germany, that's probably a fair answer. He wipes your face with a warm towel again, dabs something that smells faintly like vinegar and rosewater onto your neck, and begins trimming your hair. The scissors move quickly, confidently, snipping in smooth little bursts. You watch the pieces fall to the floor and blend in with the sawdust and herbs. From somewhere behind you, another lute string twangs. Someone slightly out of tune now. No one seems to care. The barber, blade in hand, continues his story about a merchant who accidentally sold his own boots at market and had to walk home barefoot through 3 miles of mud. You ask a question. Did the boots sell well? And he nods solemnly. Best price he ever got.
You chuckle. And he finishes combing the last of your hair into place. He spritzes a tiny amount of rose water from a carved wooden vessel onto your neck and gestures toward a basin. You stand and splash water on your face, cool and bracing, and catch your reflection again. You look okay. Better than when you walked in. Like someone who's just survived a very gentle battle. Barbers in this era weren't just tradesmen. They were custodians of calm.
The rituals, the scents, the strange little charms, they all worked together to ease the weight of fear. They didn't have sedatives, or Novocaine, or soothing hold music. But they had smoke, and stories, and curtains, and laughter, and maybe that was enough. Historians still debate how much of the barber's calming repertoire was truly intentional, and how much of it evolved by accident. Did they set out to become masters of medieval bedside manner, or did years of trial and error simply shape the perfect formula for fear reduction? There are no manuals, no surviving training guides, just fragments of practice passed down through gestures, tone, and touch. As you sit back down, the barber begins to clean his tools, one by one, dipping them in hot water, then drying them with a cloth that smells faintly of ash and lemon balm. He doesn't hum anymore. The music has stopped. The fire is lower now, pulsing softly, barely enough to light the ceiling. Your limbs feel warm and weighty, like your bones have been swaddled in fleece. A curtain billows. A leech plops quietly in its jar. Someone somewhere is asleep in the next room, and you're almost there too. You don't even flinch when the barber clinks a pair of shears back into place. You're too deep now, wrapped in a cocoon of warmth, flickering firelight, and the soft scrape of wood on wood as he puts his tools away. The chair beneath you doesn't feel like a chair anymore. It feels like a boat, gently swaying in a quiet harbor. And then he speaks again, but his voice is different now, lower, slower, calmer. He tells you about a shoemaker who once tried to trim his own beard with a knife meant for gutting fish. Let's just say, he adds with a dry smile, he learned to respect professionals. You smile too, not because it's especially funny, but because of how he says it. That voice, so steady, so unconcerned, might be the most powerful tool in the whole shop. That's the real art. His voice makes it all seem easy, even when it's not. 15th century barbers weren't just wielders of blades, they were masters of tone. A calm voice could do what a salve or a tonic could not. It could convince a trembling man to hold still while someone cut into him. It could ease the panic in a child's chest before a tooth came out. It could settle the nerves of someone who's just seen more of their own blood than they meant to. Historians still argue whether barbers were trained in this emotional finesse or simply developed it through necessity. But in towns where doctors were rare and pain was part of daily life, the calm barber was gold. You didn't just come for his hands, you came for his presence. As the barber works, he barely pauses between motions. There's no hesitation in the way he folds a towel, no nervous fidget in his fingers. This confidence, this ritual flow of movements is part of the magic. It tells your mind, you're safe now. He steps away, and an apprentice takes over briefly to sweep the floor. You hear the gentle rustle of straw and hair being gathered up. The apprentice says nothing, just hums under his breath, a quiet tune with no name. The barber returns, setting down a small plate of sugared anise seeds beside you. Sweet for the mouth, he says, bitter for the nerves. You pop one in. It crunches sharply, flooding your tongue with licorice and cloves. It's unexpected, distracting, exactly the point.
This was common too, little treats to reset the senses. Children were often given honeyed nuts or candied fennel to reward bravery and sometimes to keep them still during unpleasant moments. Adults weren't above a bribe either. It didn't matter what the treat was. It mattered when it was given. At just the right moment, even a single sugared seed could pull someone back from the edge of panic. The barber lights a fresh candle on the nearby shelf. The wax crackles as it begins to melt, sending a new wave of warmth into the room. You notice how dim the space has become. Not dark, just softened, diffused. He pours a final splash of rosewater onto your palms, instructing you to rub them together and then breathe in. You do. The smell is gentle and sharp all at once. It makes your eyelids heavy, and still he talks. Now he's telling you about another barber from a nearby town who swore he could cure gout with eel grease and a prayer. He's now out of business, he adds with a dry chuckle. But his eels are thriving. You chuckle again, not because you're fully following the logic of eel-based medical bankruptcy, but because the rhythm of the storytelling is soothing. Every line lands like a lullaby dressed up as a joke. The best barbers knew this rhythm. They could read a customer's fear the way a miller reads grain in his palm. Quick breath, more jokes. Clenched fists, time to sing a tune. And if nothing worked, there was always the tone. That steady, bored-sounding cadence that made even a bloodletting feel like a bedtime story. There's something about his voice now that's even softer than before. Maybe it's the way the fire has dimmed. Maybe it's the way your limbs feel heavier than they should. Or maybe it's just you finally giving in to the comfort of the room, of the ritual, of someone else taking charge while you simply exist. The curtain behind you rustles again, but no one speaks. There's a hush in the shop now, not because something's wrong, but because it's nearly closing time. You can feel it in the floorboards, in the flickering candle, in the way the barber moves more slowly, wiping down his blades with a damp cloth in long, lazy strokes.
He folds his apron and sets it aside. Then he pulls himself a sip of something. Maybe the same stuff he gave you earlier, maybe something stronger. He doesn't offer you more. You are already halfway asleep and he knows it. One last sound, the tiny clink of the lock being turned on a drawer. Tools tucked safely away, scissors nestled into their pouch, blade oiled and set to rest. And he turns to you one last time, brushing a stray hair from your shoulder. You did fine, he says. Didn't even flinch. You didn't. You barely remember the middle part. That's how good he is. And maybe that's the real reason people keep coming back, despite the blood, despite the risk, despite the odd chicken foot on the wall. Because somewhere between the warm cloth, the candlelight, and the lull of a half-told story, fear becomes something softer, something quieter. Like a dull pain dulled further by routine. Like a memory already starting to blur around the edges. Like a voice telling you everything's okay. And for once, you believe it.
The barber's chair creaks as you shift your weight, not to stand, not just yet, but to stretch just a little. The weight of your limbs is surprising, like you've been slowly sinking into the wood. The air in the room has thickened to a balm, all herbs and warmth, and the faintest residue of smoke. Someone snores softly in the adjacent room, though whether it's a dozing apprentice or a very relaxed leech is unclear. Either way, no one seems to mind. You look down at your hands, still faintly sticky with rose water, and the bundle of herbs the barber tucked into your coat pocket when you weren't paying attention. It rattles a bit when you move. He called it a sleep sachet and advised keeping it near your head at night, so your dreams don't drift into your blood. You nodded, because that seemed like a perfectly reasonable concern. The barber hums again as he straightens the counter. The tune is different this time, slower. It has the feel of a closing song, something to wind the day down, something to coax the last of the fear out of the room and send it quietly into the corner. He doesn't look at you. He doesn't have to. He knows you're still here. You haven't fled. You've made it to the other side of the ritual. This is where the real trick lies. Not in the blade or the tonic, not even in the charm dangling near the door. It's in the routine, the way the same steps, followed in the same order, become familiar enough to be comforting. You came in with tension under your skin. You're leaving with lavender under your collar. Barbers of the 15th century weren't just artisans of hair and blood. They were curators of repetition. They learned early that people feared the unknown more than pain. So they created knowns, warm water, certain stories, the same soap, the same seat. The haircut was only half of it. The calm was the real craft. Historians still argue whether these calming rituals were consciously designed or simply the result of centuries of improvisation. Did barbers intentionally choreograph every detail to soothe the mind? Or did they stumble upon what worked, one frightened customer at a time? It's hard to say, but the rituals endured, passed from master to apprentice like secret recipes, like lullabies no one remembered composing. You notice how clean the floor is now. The apprentice must have swept again. A few hairs remain in the cracks between the floorboards, caught in the grain. You imagine how many feet have walked across these planks, how many nervous glances, trembling hands, reluctant smiles, and how many of those customers left feeling like you do now. Just a little dazed, a little foggy, but lighter. The barber unties his apron and stretches his back with a grunt. Then, with a wink, he says, "You'll be back." They always come back. And you will. Because fear is never a one-time visitor. It circles back, again and again, whispering doubts and conjuring worst-case scenarios. And when it does, you'll return to this chair, this fire, this absurd story about a merchant and an eel and a cursed handkerchief. You'll come back for the routine, for the smell of herbs and old wood, for the sound of metal against leather, for the gentle way he tells you to lean your head back and close your eyes, just for a moment. You stand now, legs a bit stiff, and thank him. He nods and presses a small wooden token into your palm, something carved roughly into a star, maybe a keepsake, maybe just scrap wood. To remind you that you're not bleeding, he says. You don't even check. You trust him. The door creaks open once more. Outside, the sky has turned to ink. The street is quiet, stones slick with dew. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, then stops. The air is cold and clean, and for the first time all day, you're not thinking about anything at all. You walk away from the shop with your collar turned up, hands deep in your pockets, the charm gently bumping your thigh. The scent of smoke still clings to your sleeves, but it's not unpleasant. It smells like ritual, like rosemary and patience, like calm, carved out of chaos by someone who learned, long ago, how to hush fear with nothing more than a cloth, a cup, and a voice. You keep walking, and you don't look back. And now, as the last candle flickers low in the quiet shop, and the echo of the barber's humming fades into the evening mist, your thoughts begin to drift, soft and slow, like footsteps down a cobbled alley, like smoke curling up into the rafters, like a story already half forgotten. The warmth of the chair still lingers in your muscles, as if it's following you into sleep. You feel your breath slow, your jaw unclench, your shoulders sink, just a bit deeper into the mattress beneath you. Even now, you can almost smell the faintest trace of lavender and wood smoke
that ancient blend of comfort and routine. There's something soothing about old rituals, about the hands that repeat them, not for show, but because they've always worked. Someone hums while they work. Someone tells a story that doesn't need a punchline. Someone lays out their tools in the same exact order every time. And suddenly, you feel a little less alone in your thoughts.